Chapter 652. I don't need an emperor to suppress you. I alone am enough. Before his eyes, the gigantic hand that reached the heavens had already descended. In an instant, countless star trajectories were destroyed, and the void was shattered. This was a move of the lawless technique, which contained the power of heaven and earth. It was violent and unbridled, as if countless existences were nothing in its eyes. However, when Lu Feng saw the frightening killing intent, when he saw the unfamiliar yet familiar back, a trace of dullness flashed across his eyes. After that, it was an uncontrollable excitement. The giant hand that reached the sky finally landed in front of him, in front of the monstrous genius of the Nether Clan. Lu Feng could sense that the underworld race genius was just an ordinary genius. His strength was only at the perfect stage. Compared to the owner of the giant hand in front of him, the underworld race genius was inferior in both strength and aptitude. Therefore, if the giant hand landed, it would end everything in an instant. The underworld race genius would be annihilated. However, just as everything was about to end, a ray of light appeared in the sky. In an instant, the giant hand was annihilated. Not a trace of it was left behind. When the ray of light shot towards the giant hand, Lu Feng looked a little nervous. However, in the next moment, this expression disappeared completely. This was because an extremely powerful ray of light had appeared in the void as well. The two rays of light collided. There was no shocking fluctuation, only a kind of complete annihilation. A voice was gradually heard in the void. The underworld race is only this capable. You can't beat the younger generation, yet you still have to rely on these protectors. I really don't know what qualifications you have to be on the same level as the human race. The voice disappeared, but it had already spread throughout the entire starry sky. The moment this voice disappeared, another voice was heard. Using a king of massacre to fight against an emperor Dao domain genius. Only the human race can do that. Silence. Speechless silence. However, in the next moment, another voice was heard. It's not his fault that he is weak. However, it's his fault that he came out and spoke without thinking. If you want to insult others, you have to have the ability to bear the consequences. If you don't have anything, what qualifications do you have to insult others as you wish? The owner of the voice was the being who had waved that terrifying arm. At this moment, he was standing quietly on this ancient void continent, filled with a terrifying fighting spirit that could burn the heavens and earth. In the void, the old voice was heard again. That's right, but it's not about you. Are you the emperor? Since you're not the emperor, what qualifications do you have to represent him in doing such things? I think the main reason is that you want to use a weakling to establish your authority. That's all. If the crown prince of the heavens, would you still dare to say that? Hearing this, the owner of the voice wanted to say something, but in the next moment, another voice rang out in the void. Underworld race, underworld race. As for the matters of the emperor, he could do it himself. Underworld, underworld race. For a moment, the owner of the voice was slightly stunned. Just when everyone thought that he was going to fly into a rage, he suddenly turned around and looked in Lu Feng's direction. Yes, I don't need to get involved in the emperor's underworld race. Although his voice was incomparably calm, anyone could see the excitement in his eyes. Countless people in the void focused their attention on this. It had been half a day since they arrived here. During this time, countless conflicts had arisen between the underworld race and the human race. There had even been more than a dozen clashes. However, the battle just now had undoubtedly attracted the most attention. After all, it had been a clash involving monstrous geniuses. Furthermore, the King of Massacre had also been mixed in. Therefore, at this moment, when the King of Massacre of the human clan showed a strange expression, everyone focused their attention on him. The various existences frowned slightly as they watched the young figure walk out of the crack step by step. This was because they realized that they couldn't see through everything about this young existence. He gave off a feeling that he was completely shrouded in the unknown and was filled with a vague consciousness. The figure instantly descended in front of the King of Massacre of the human race. The two of them stared at each other silently. After a long while, the king of massacre of the human race suddenly swung his fist at the descending figure. Of course, this scene wasn't surprising because of the internal strife of the human race, but because of the punch of the king of massacre. He didn't use any power at all. It was just a light blow. Finally, the fist landed on the figure. It's been 2 years. There were too many emotions in his voice, so it was easy to tell that the two of them knew each other. The figure sighed softly. He looked at the king of massacre of the human race and finally smiled. Yes, it's been 2 years. 2 years ago, you were a mid-level warrior, and I wasn't even a beginner warrior. Now 2 years have passed. I've reached the peak perfect grade, and you've also reached the high perfect grade. Who would have thought that we would meet under such circumstances in such a place? Eternal, the king of massacre of the human race, was the young master of the Yaolanli family, which ranked in the top 10 among the first-rate families of the present era. He was Li Yongheng. Lu Feng smiled at Li Yongheng. Li Yongheng did the same. 2 years ago, a bottle of medicine from Li Yongheng had allowed Lu Feng to have an amazing encounter and complete a shocking transformation. He had become a truly supreme existence and started on the path to defying the heavens. Now, they met again. At such a time in such a place, under the witness of countless geniuses and monsters, they met again. They looked at each other without saying anything. There was no need to say anything that could be said. Although they hadn't seen each other for such a long time, when they met again, they understood each other. After all, they were brothers. They were really good brothers. I've overstepped my boundaries this time. Since you're already here, I don't have to worry about what's going to happen next. Lu Feng nodded gently and smiled slowly. He looked at the underworld race genius in the distance. You provoked me just now, didn't you? You said that you had to solve your own problems. Since that's the case, I'm already here. In that case, do you dare to say it again? Do you dare to accept my challenge? Lu Feng's words were so indifferent and casual. However, after these words came out of his mouth, countless existences sucked in a breath of cold air, and their faces were filled with shock. They weren't idiots. Naturally, they knew what these words meant. This meant that the person who spoke was the emperor, Lu Feng. He was actually Lu Feng. At this moment, these people finally understood why the king of massacre of the human race had such an expression after the underworld race genius had said those words. He and the emperor were friends. Furthermore, they were very close friends. Naturally, he couldn't tolerate his friend being insulted. Now that the emperor was here, there was naturally no need for him to do anything. Lu Feng calmly looked at the monstrous genius of the underworld clan in front of him. He was smiling so indifferently. A level 4 emperor-level domain realm genius was an existence that could be conferred the title of emperor among the various peak overlords. However, in front of Lu Feng, he was just an ant. Even though his cultivation base was the same as Lu Feng's, he was still an ant. After the battle at the sacred remains, he had even been able to kill a true god who had condensed a supreme divine body. Then, he had used the era of the emperor for the first time against the human ruler's mark. Over the past month, Lu Feng had clashed with Lu Luo every day. Although he hadn't broken through the final shackles and raised his cultivation base, his strength was really terrifying. Therefore, Lu Feng felt like he was looking at ants as he faced these monstrous geniuses. Everyone fell silent when they heard Lu Feng's words. Lu Feng was going to fight against the underworld race genius? This was simply an asymmetrical battle. That monstrous genius' true cultivation base was much lower than Lu Fenglai's. Even if they were at the same level, even if he was already conferred the title of god, he definitely wouldn't be a match for Lu Feng. This was simply a qualitative difference. Countless people shifted their gazes to that monstrous genius. They all wanted to see the final outcome. That monstrous genius's face was deathly pale. He hadn't expected that his casual words would actually attract the emperor. One had to know that he wasn't the only one who had said that. At this moment, standing in front of everyone, he wanted to be a little more forceful. However, he really couldn't say those words. After all, if he said those words, he would definitely suffer the fate of being completely suppressed. Back when Lu Feng had slaughtered his way through the void in the foreign battlefields, he had never cared about the status of his opponents. Finally, When everyone was silent, the evildoer guardian in the void spoke again. Emperor, your existence should be comparable to an immortal king or a demon king. You should be searching for the human ruler's mark. Is there any meaning in haggling with such a junior? Indeed, when they heard this, everyone nodded inwardly. Lu Feng was no longer on the same level as them. There was simply no meaning in haggling like this. However, in the next moment, Lu Feng laughed. It was a mocking smile. Junior? He's also considered a junior? If I'm not mistaken, then he should be 20 years old. As for me, I'm only a little over 18 years old. If we really want to talk about it, is he older than me? Lu Feng's words silenced everyone who wanted to say something. They fell into a deep silence once again. That's right. These humans had only seen Lu Feng's terrifying strength, but had forgotten his true age. Lu Feng was only a little over 18 years old. Compared to this monstrous genius, he was much younger. Chapter 653. The silent atmosphere was stifling and unbearable. After a long time, the voice spoke again. You understand what I mean. You also know what I want to say. He is indeed older than you, but in terms of strength, the two of you are no longer on the same level. If you fight with him, you will only become a joke. Lu Feng raised his head and looked at the endless void. After a while, he nodded slightly. The mockery in his eyes became even more obvious. Finally, his gaze fell on the trembling monster in front of him. Do I, Lu Feng, need anyone to remind me what I am doing? I am who I am. Why should I care about other people's feelings? My title is Emperor. Do I need others to point fingers at me and comment on me? The world was silent. Countless people looked at Lu Feng with strange expressions. If other monstrous geniuses heard this, even if it was the 30th prince or the crown prince of the heavenly Tao, they would probably give up in the end. However, Lu Feng didn't. He had always been doing things his own way. He never cared about other people's opinions. Lu Feng was right. As an emperor, why should he care about other people's opinions? He was the one and only himself. A terrifying tremor could be felt in the void. Everyone knew that the underworld race's guardian was about to make a move. However, in the next moment, a cold snort spread throughout the world. The almighty existences hidden in the endless laws of the underworld race felt a kind of turbulence in their bloodlines and a kind of trembling in their souls. In an instant, countless people looked behind Lu Feng. Their confusion was dispelled completely. They finally saw the identity of the person who had snorted. Lu Shun, the head of the Lu family, Prince Shun Lu Shun, the head of the Lu family. His authority was sky-high, and his power was terrifying. He was an unparalleled almighty. He was once the pride of the Lu family. Ever since he became the head of the Lu family, he had been quietly staying in the Lu family. Now he had actually appeared. That's the great ancestor and third ancestor of the Lu family. Two invincible almighties. To think that all of them have arrived. Countless people sucked in a breath of cold air. This time, the Lu family's lineup was really terrifying. Two invincible almighties and dozens of peerless almighties. With such a lineup, sweeping through the heavens was nothing difficult. Lu Shun's eyes were filled with endless coldness. He looked at the endless void and finally spoke. Since when did the children of the Lu family need to be judged by ants like you? Domineering. This was domineering. Lu Shun's words made everyone shocked and speechless. This was the head of the #1 aristocratic family in the world, a terrifying existence at the peak of power in the world. Silence. The void was completely silent. In the face of Lu Shun's provocation, many of the existences of the underworld race actually did not say a word. However, this situation did not last for long. This was because another crack appeared in the void. From this crack came a shocking wave of energy. 5 invincible almighties, the 5 ancient, peerless elders of the underworld race. They actually appeared too. Could it be that this time, it's not just about sending those young existences into the ruins, but also a war between the two peak overlords? Previously, the arrival of the Lu family's 2 invincible almighties had already shocked many existences who had arrived a long time ago. However, The underworld race was even more exaggerated. They had actually sent 5 invincible almighties. What a terrifying lineup this was. One had to know that just these 7 invincible almighties alone were enough to sweep through any peak Overlord race where the Divine King did not appear. This was the terrifying foundation of 2 of the 3 peak overlords of the world. Lu Shun, we understand that you are overflowing with talent. However, your strength does not qualify you to say such words. In front of us, you are nothing more than a slightly stronger ant. You, who do you think you are? The invincible almighties of the underworld race were clearly dissatisfied with Lu Shun's domineering attitude. The moment they spoke, they were filled with a thick, killing intent. At this moment, countless laws appeared in the void, and a cold aura of death appeared. This was the terrifying power of invincible almighties. Their words caused the space and time to tremble. At this moment, the grand ancestor of the Lu family finally walked out. Dark Sovereign King, you have been hiding in the underworld race for more than 1,000 years. Now, you have finally come out. I have been waiting for this battle for a very, very long time. Back then, if not for your underworld race's ancestor, the underworld king, sending his consciousness here, you would have died long ago. You would not be as powerful as you are now. How about it? Let's continue the unfinished battle of the past. These words caused the void to tremble once again. The grand ancestor of the Lu family was an invincible almighty. In fact, he was one of the peak invincible almighties. In the entire boundless universe, apart from the Divine King, only the otherworldly supremes could defeat him. As for the others, they were at most on par with him. Looking at the grand ancestor of the Lu family, the Dark Sovereign King's expression was cold. There was a terrifying will and power that could kill everything in the world. Alchemy St. Lu, if you want to fight, then let's fight. When have I ever been afraid? Alchemy St. Lu. Apart from his identity as a grand ancestor, the grand ancestor of the Lu family was also one of the top 3 alchemy saint masters in the world of alchemy. Alchemy St. Lu's eyes were cold. This was the first time Lu Feng had seen such a cold expression from the grand ancestor. At this moment, Lu Feng was slightly interested in the relationship between the grand ancestor and the Dark Sovereign King. However, everything was not over yet, because in the next moment, 4 invincible almighties walked out from behind the Dark Sovereign King. They looked at the grand ancestor and the 3rd grand ancestor of the Lu family with a contemptuous smile. Let's fight. Our underworld race has never been afraid. Countless people were trembling. They did not expect that a monstrous genius from the underworld race who had just insulted the emperor would cause such a situation to occur. One had to know that there were countless people who had insulted Lu Feng in the underworld race. Unfortunately, his insults were heard by Lu Feng's good friend, the young master of the Yaolanli family. Therefore, the following events had occurred, and now there was a confrontation between the top powers in the universe. The atmosphere was extremely tense. The grand ancestor and the 3rd grand ancestor of the Lu family, because they were the Lu family's bloodline, they were the true peak existences among the invincible almighties. Although there was no chance of victory in a 2 versus 5 battle, they would not be suppressed so easily. Once a great battle broke out, even if the 5 invincible almighties of the underworld race attacked together, it would not be easy for them to win. At that time, this place would be completely annihilated, and even the laws would be shattered. These people would not be able to leave safely. In an instant, many existences, regardless of whether they were from the human race or the underworld race, had a look of resentment. They knew that if it was not for that monstrous genius from the underworld race, such a situation would not have occurred. This day was destined to be a day of turmoil, a day that was destined to shock the world. Originally, many existences thought that the arrival of 7 invincible almighties was already enough to shock the world. However, it was not over yet. Everything was far from over, because just when everyone was nervous and thought that a battle was about to break out, many cracks appeared in the void again. Terrifying, majestic auras began to emerge from the cracks, causing the entire void to tremble. The almighties of the human race had descended. Are you bullying the human race, because we have few invincible almighties? What about now? Ice cold. It was endless ice cold. This time, an endless cold aura emerged from the void again. That was the aura that belonged to any invincible almighties. They had descended the human race. The invincible almighties of the Federation government, the primogenitor of the Beigong family, the primogenitor of the Nanming family, the grand primogenitor of the Serene feather family. For a total of 4 invincible almighties had descended. All of them had descended. In an instant, the number of invincible almighties belonging to the human race had reached 6. In terms of numbers, they had surpassed the underworld race. Moreover, among them were the 2 grand supreme elders of the Lu family, Serene Feather and Lin Huan. The 3 of them were equivalent to 4 invincible almighties of the underworld race. The situation instantly tilted. However, everything was not over yet. It was far from over. This was because in the next moment, another crack appeared in the void. An existence with a transcendent aura slowly walked out of the void. Behind him was a group of people who were similarly transcendent. Just by looking at their appearance, these people were not martial artists at all. They did not have any domineering aura. They were so calm and peaceful, like immortals from the 9 heavens who had quietly descended to the mortal world. However, when these people saw the people walking out of the crack, they were filled with fear. They knew who these people were. Void Emperor. It's the unparalleled Void Emperor. It's actually the Federal University's unparalleled Void Emperor. There are so many psychics. Why is it that even the Federal University has appeared this time? Could it be that the human race and the underworld race are really going to start an earth-shattering war here? That incomparably tranquil figure was the Void Emperor. It was an unparalleled Void Emperor. The unparalleled Void Emperor's existence must be a Void Emperor above level 5. Sensing the terrifying majesty of this Void Emperor, everyone understood that this was most likely an invincible almighty. It was even the most terrifying invincible almighty comparable to the grand ancestors. 7. At this moment, the number of invincible almighties that appeared in the human race had reached a shocking number of 7. Among them, there were even 4 of the most terrifying invincible almighties. Such a lineup was indescribable. The faces of the 5 life and death quasi-kings of the underworld all twisted slightly. They had never thought that the human race would be able to produce 7 such existences. If they didn't know that they were escorting those monstrous geniuses into the ruins, they would have really thought that the human race was going to war with the underworld race. At this moment, the arrogance from before had disappeared. The 5 life and death quasi-kings of the underworld race were not idiots. The 7 people in front of them were at least equivalent to 9 or even 10 ordinary invincible almighties. Once they clashed, they would be completely annihilated in an instant. Looking coldly at the 5 life and death quasi-kings of the underworld race, the eternal Night King of the human race spoke up. What? Do the underworld race only know how to rely on their numbers to fight? Now we're all here. If you want to fight, then let's fight. The human race will accept all of you. The eternal Night King of the human race had already begun to emit his aura at this moment. The other existences also did the same. For a moment, the entire void was filled with endless turbulence, filled with earth-shattering tremors. Those existences below the invincible almighties were all trembling, almost prostrating themselves on the ground. They were different from those invincible almighties who had the protection of their race's invincible almighties. These people had to face the invincible almighties alone. The life and death quasi-kings were invincible almighties, and the meaning of invincible almighties was true invincibility. Their aura was the aura of invincibility. Those below the invincible almighties were no match for them. The battle was on the verge of breaking out once again. Finally, the Dark King of the underworld race walked out. However, he did not walk out casually. In his hand, he was quietly holding a crystal, and it was the existence of this crystal that caused the faces of the human race's invincible almighties to change. Life Crystal. The life crystal was a grade 9 divine item. In fact, it was the pinnacle grade 9 divine item. Such an item was something that even the invincible race would be moved by. Even the divine king would want to fight for it. But now, it was quietly held in the palm of the Dark King's hand. However, what truly shocked the human race was not the value of this crystal, but its use. What sealed inside could it be? The grand ancestor of the Liu family had an ugly expression. After some hesitation, he spoke up. Hearing this, the Dark King laughed coldly. The life crystal is able to contain the power of the Divine King's power. That's right, it contains the life and will of our Nether race's ancestor, the Nether King. Once it shatters, the clone of our Nether race's ancestor, the Nether King, will appear in a short period of time. And this clone is equivalent to the ancestor of the Nether King descending personally. Hearing this, countless people sucked in a breath of cold air. The ancestor of the Nether King. Although there were many blemishes on his reputation, no one dared to doubt his existence and status. After all, he was the second strongest person in the universe. As expected, the 5 of you are here for the Emperor. You knew that the Emperor would not give up on such a heaven-defying opportunity. So, all of you are here to kill the Emperor. The Nether King is indeed powerful. Vaguely, the 6 quasi-life and death kings began to circle around Lufone. Although they were invincible almighties, and some of them could even escape with their lives from the hands of invincible almighties, they understood that there was a fundamental difference between them and the Divine King. Once the Divine King descends, they might be able to escape, but they would not be able to fight. Therefore, these people wanted to protect Lufone with all their might. Seeing these people's actions, the Dark King did not do anything. He just stood there quietly, ignoring their actions. Chapter 654. Looks like Dao Santian was right to ask me to prepare. A long sigh resounded in the starry sky, ringing in everyone's ears. At this moment, many beings turned their gazes to the person who spoke, to the mighty Void Emperor. His indifferent posture was gone. Instead, it was replaced by a domineering and terrifying aura. Behind him, the terrifying crack opened even wider. An instant later, the shadow of a terrifying behemoth emerged from the crack. The moment they saw the huge object, everyone was stunned. Lufone was even more so. After a long time, Lufone finally recovered completely. He knew that its appearance was enough. Even if the Netherworld tribe had the Crystal of Life, they had nothing to fear. Lufone recognized the object that appeared. In fact, he was quite familiar with it. This was because it was the symbol of greatness that had been lying dormant in the Federal University's campus. Divine brilliance. This was the divine brilliance. The divine brilliance that the divine brilliance Heavenly Emperor had refined in the past. It was a terrifying weapon of war with a shocking amount of power. The divine brilliance Heavenly Emperor had almost entered the life realm of the life realm quasi-emperors. At that time, his power was limitless. He looked down on the galaxy era and was a terrifying existence that was equivalent to the Overlord of time. This divine brilliance had followed the divine brilliance Heavenly Emperor on expeditions and was stained with the blood of the Divine King. Its terror was unparalleled. Strictly speaking, this was definitely a peak 10th grade or even an 11th grade weapon. Now, there was a Void Emperor controlling the divine brilliance. Although it could not unleash its peak power, it was still possible to fight against a clone of the Netherworld King. After all, this clone could not exist for too long. Therefore, at this moment, the existence of the human tribe was still absolutely powerful. Their opponents could not resist at all. The faces of a Netherworld tribe could no longer be described as ugly. 5 of their invincible almighties had arrived here. They had brought along peak 9th grade divine objects, the terrifying Crystal of Life, and the majesty of the Netherworld tribe's ancestors. However, all their advantages were still illusory and a joke. In front of the 7 invincible almighties of a human tribe, there were even 4 peak life and death quasi-emperors. Their numbers were a joke. In front of the divine flame condensed by the former Shen Huang, celestial emperor of the human race, the crystal of life, and the avatar of the netherworld king were just a joke. At this moment, all of this seemed so laughable. No matter how much they had schemed and manipulated, no matter how confident they were, in the face of true strength, all of this had become a silent mockery. If it weren't for the fact that the netherworld race's strength was far inferior to the human race's, perhaps the netherworld race would have gone crazy after being humiliated like this. Silence. Endless silence. The empty emperor of a human race smirked as he looked at the dark sovereign king of the underworld race. What? Do you still want to fight now? I know that the 5 of you came here with the life crystal containing the Nether King progenitor's clone. You came here to kill the emperor. Although I don't know why you dare to take such a huge risk to kill a taboo monarch, I don't know why. But obviously your plan fell through. You guys have planned so much. How could we not have thought of it? That's right. The emperor belonged to the human race, and the emperor's enemies were all the other peak Overlord races. Since they wanted to kill Lu Feng, how could the human race, who was supposed to protect Lu Feng, not make any arrangements? If it wasn't for his existence, they would have even arranged for a supreme being of the other path to be Lu Feng's protector. Seeing the mocking looks on the faces of the countless human experts, the 5 invincible almighties of the underworld race had no choice but to endure it. They knew that they had no chance of success in front of such a strong human race. If they were to fight, the 5 of them would surely die here. Of course, if their deaths could be exchanged for the Emperor's death, they would be willing to die, because they knew that the Emperor's existence was a huge threat to the underworld race. The Emperor's current performance was like another human monarch in the world. Many existences were certain that Lu Feng would have no problem becoming the supreme divine king in the future. Even becoming the overlord of an epoch wouldn't be a problem. The underworld race and the human race were mortal enemies. Many existences in the underworld race knew that Lu Feng could let the other peak overlord races go, but he definitely wouldn't let the underworld race go. After all, Lu Feng's father was the godslayer, Lu Tao. His path to becoming the divine king had been destroyed by the underworld race's progenitor. One should know that in the world of cultivation, cutting off other people's hopes of progress was definitely a mortal enemy. And Lu Tao's importance to Lu Feng could be found out by anyone with a bit of intelligence. Therefore, they knew that Lu Feng definitely wouldn't let the underworld race go. An overlord of an epoch who hated the underworld race was definitely a disaster that could wipe out a race. Therefore, they were willing to sacrifice themselves to preserve hope for the underworld race. But now, they also knew that all of this was impossible. Therefore, they could only give up and watch the human race quietly. Many existences in the human race also did the same. Both sides knew that this earth-shattering clash wouldn't happen. Although the human race had the strength to crush the underworld race, if a battle really broke out, there wouldn't be many geniuses and monstrous geniuses left. Shen Huang's appearance might implicate a lot of people, but it could only guarantee Lu Feng's absolute safety at most. Apart from Lu Feng, many monstrous geniuses of the human race had already arrived. If any one of them died, it would be a heavy blow that they couldn't bear. Therefore, the human race also didn't wish to fight. After looking at each other for a long time, both sides finally stopped fighting and cast their gazes into the distance. They looked at the illusory figure that was turning from blurry to reality. 3,000 years ago, the opening of the 6 great relics created an incomparably terrifying golden era. Now it's opening again in this golden era that was supposed to be the peak of the war. Then, what kind of earth-shattering change will happen this time? Many existences were anticipating everything that might happen. Finally, the grand ancestor of the Lu family looked at the dark sovereign king. His expression had already returned to its previous calm and peaceful state. If one only looked at their appearances, no one would have thought that the 2 of them were at daggers drawn and were about to fight to the death. Now, let the monstrous geniuses and monstrous geniuses enter that place. The human race was the stronger side and could act as if nothing had happened. However, the underworld race couldn't do that. They were feeling extremely uncomfortable right now. Therefore, although the dark sovereign king agreed to the grand ancestor's words, his expression still didn't look too good. He nodded lightly and didn't say anything. At this moment, the supreme existences of both the human race and the underworld race looked at the thousands of monstrous geniuses and monstrous geniuses behind them. In a while, the ancient relic will open. At that time, all of you will be able to enter it. The moment they heard this voice, everyone was in an uproar. These people naturally knew the greatness of this relic. They knew that once they entered, it would be time for them to transform. Therefore, these young existences no longer concealed their desires. Their expressions were written all over their faces. Excitement, incomparable excitement. Looking at the excited expressions of these monstrous geniuses and monstrous geniuses, the supreme existences of both the human race and the underworld race couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Their thoughts were completely different from these young existences. This was because they could see countless existences falling. Although this trip to the relic will have heaven-shaking opportunities, there will also be endless dangers within. The last time the relic opened, more than 70% of the human race's monstrous geniuses and monstrous geniuses fell. Hearing this number, everyone was slightly taken aback. Then, a trace of shock appeared on their faces. 70%. This was 70%. It wasn't 7, nor was it 70. According to the standard of 1,000 people, this was a total of 700 monstrous geniuses. Such a number was simply too terrifying. These people knew that there were dangers within, but no matter how much they imagined, they couldn't imagine that the probability of death would be so high. They had come here to make a breakthrough and lay a foundation for the battle of the monarchs. They hadn't come here to die. Gradually, some of the geniuses began to show signs of fear. They understood that among the 70% that had died, perhaps 99% were geniuses. After all, monstrous existences absolutely couldn't die so easily. Therefore, they really hesitated. Seeing these people's expressions, the 7 supreme existences of the human race and the primogenitors of the various clans remained expressionless. This was because they knew that this kind of reaction was expected. Finally, the great ancestor of the Liu family spoke again. If any of you wish to withdraw, you are completely free to do so. There is nothing shameful about this. After all, the probability of death is simply too high. You may be able to obtain heaven-shaking opportunities after entering, but you will have to pay the price of death. Therefore, it is still not too late to withdraw now. There was a slight commotion in the human race's camp. Finally, after a few geniuses walked out, more and more geniuses left. Even if they entered, what they could obtain was limited. If they survived until the end, they would only be able to enter the ancient altar. In the altar, due to their talent, the time they could obtain to cultivate was also limited. Therefore, this time, it really wasn't worth it. Finally, the group gradually stabilized. Looking at the remaining people, the great ancestor of the Liu family nodded gently. At this moment, there were less than 300 people left. However, among these 300 people, almost all of them were the top geniuses and monstrous existences of the current generation of the human race. Among them, there was Emperor Liu Feng, Feather Yu, and Ronghua, 2 monstrous existences, and the taboo monarch. There were also the desolate emperor, Wan Yueming, Qi Liang, Li Yongheng, Lu Luo, and many other monstrous existences of the Emperor Dao domain. However, it was a pity that they didn't see the former top genius of the human race, the head of the 7 great emperors, the Demon Emperor. This was a pity. Among these countless existences, it could be said that the monstrous existences occupied a lot of positions. After hearing the words of the great ancestor of the Liu family, they didn't waver in the slightest. This was because they were all monstrous existences. In the face of any danger or difficulty, they absolutely wouldn't retreat a single step. They would never, ever retreat. Have you all decided everything? Chapter 655. His voice was indifferent, but it was filled with an unquestionable majesty. Although he didn't use any strength, he was still a peak quasi-life and death quasi-king, a saint alchemist. Once the great ancestor of the Lu clan became serious, even a heavenly god would tremble. However, after hearing his words, many of the monstrous geniuses were incomparably resolute. They didn't say anything else because to them, any words were illusory. Since they had already made up their minds, they would walk on with the greatest determination. Finally, the great ancestor nodded gently and turned his gaze towards the nether race. The nether race's situation was more serious than the human race's. This was because this expedition to the ruins was the true test for the nether race. Natural disasters and beast disasters were nothing to worry about. The nether race wasn't afraid of these things. However, man-made disasters were what they feared the most. Now that Emperor Lu Feng had joined the human race, they were in great danger. These people knew about Lu Feng's past. They knew that Lu Feng had transformed into Futu and slaughtered hundreds of monstrous geniuses and monstrous geniuses of the foreign race in the medicine god territory. Although there were 1,000 people this time, to the emperor, there was no difference between 1,000 people and a single person when he used the sky of green to suppress them. They were truly afraid. Therefore, more and more people chose to withdraw. Seeing these monstrous geniuses and monstrous geniuses of the nether race withdraw, the Dark Sovereign King's eyes weren't filled with anger, but satisfaction. He was truly gratified that these people had left. All right, the rest of you, follow me and head there. The moment his voice landed, the Dark Sovereign King took a step forward and walked towards the virtual image that had almost solidified. Behind him, the 200 monstrous geniuses and monstrous geniuses of the nether race didn't stop. They followed the Dark Sovereign King's footsteps towards the virtual image. There were slightly more than 200 monstrous geniuses from the nether race, and slightly less than 300 from the human race. When the two races were added together, there were roughly 500 monstrous geniuses. These were all the monstrous geniuses and monstrous geniuses who were going to enter this time. At this moment, the virtual image had already solidified. This was a spatial crack that resembled a space-time wormhole. It was deep and dark, as if countless secrets were buried within it, hiding unparalleled dangers. The great ancestor of the Lu family and the Dark Sovereign King of the nether race looked at each other. In the end, they nodded their heads. Just now, they had checked the young existences in the opposing team. Among them, there was no existence above the deity realm. Therefore, this was enough. The crack will open in a moment. I remember. But when is safety the most important thing? Everything else is illusory and dispensable. Do you all understand? They exchanged glances and monstrous geniuses of the nether race. Seeing this scene, alchemist Saint Lu finally left this place. In just a few moments, the crack had completely opened. However, those who were able to come here were not weak existences. Abel, T, was humans S, to the Lu. 2. He looked at one of the nether race's geniuses. His eyes glinted. As expected, the nether race is also prepared. You are indeed one of the top 3 Overlord races. The one at the forefront of the nether race was the epic monster. He was a true epic monster. Lu Feng was slightly shocked when he saw him. At the same time, realization dawned on him. He knew that since the Nether Blood race and the Heavenly Dao race could produce epic monsters like the 31st Prince and the Heavenly Dao Crown Prince, it was impossible that the Nether race, which was ranked 3rd, did not have one. In the past few thousand years, the Nether race had produced countless geniuses and geniuses. Therefore, Lu Feng finally understood the situation when he saw the underworld race's monstrous talent. But at the same time, he was also shocked. This was because Lu Feng realized that this monstrous supreme king of the underworld race was truly terrifying, extremely terrifying. He was much, much stronger than Feather Yuronghua. The Nether race's supreme king was a terrifying existence who had reached the 2nd grade demigod realm. Furthermore, he had comprehended 3 supreme powers. 3 supreme powers in a 2nd grade demigod realm were enough to deal with Lu Luo. The nether race's supreme king frowned slightly when he heard Lu Feng's words. However, he still spoke. The foundation of the nether race is naturally not something the human race can compare to. After all, we have existed for a long time. Lu Feng did not get angry at his words. He only shook his head gently. Upon seeing Lu Feng's actions, the Supreme Monarch was clearly taken aback. However, Lu Feng immediately explained everything. Lu Feng's explanation infuriated the Nether race's Supreme King. What a pity! What a pity! The Nether race finally produced a young underworld monarch. In the end, he is going to die here. Lu Feng's eyes flashed with a cold glint the moment he finished speaking. The young underworld monarch's eyes trembled when he heard what Lu Luo said. Emperor, you are only at the great perfection stage now. If you can defeat a true god, I can do the same. If you want to kill me, then kill me. The current young underworld monarch, will be waiting for you. Lu Feng smiled faintly and did not say anything else. Then, he took a step forward and walked into the crack. Lu Feng had some regrets during this trip to the ruins because he did not see Su Wanchao, Qi Yunxing, and the others. They were all true demons. At the very least, they were the emperors of massacre. They were definitely qualified to enter this place. It was a pity that their cultivation base was too low. They had not even reached the great perfection stage. Once they entered, they would definitely die. One had to know that it was impossible to help each other in this situation. After all, the place they entered was random, without the help of their companions. Although the two of them were monstrous geniuses and were even the kings of massacre, they had no chance of resisting the monstrous geniuses of the Underworld clan. In the end, they were bound to die. This was what Lu Feng and the human race did not wish to see. Therefore, even though he felt a little regretful that he did not see his two brothers, Lu Feng was still glad. After all, the young underworld monarch in front of him was just a hidden young underworld monarch. Once he encountered the demons of the human race, other than Lu Luo, only the desolate emperor, feather spirit, and a few other demons would be able to escape. Looking at his appearance, it seemed like he was going to go on a killing spree. The young underworld monarch's voice was still echoing in his ears. However, Lu Feng did not really care about this, because he had the strength to not care. If it was before the battle with the Human King's Mark, or before the battle with Lu Luo, Lu Feng might not be able to do what he said unless he used 1 billion mortal dust and 1 billion immortal immortals. However, that was all in the past. Right now, he had already surpassed his previous peak and entered a completely different and terrifying realm. He had enough confidence. Looking at the young underworld monarch's disappearing figure, Lu Luo only had a mocking smile in his eyes. These days, he and Lu Feng were constantly clashing. Naturally, he knew how terrifying his young lord was. Even though Lu Feng still had not broken through, Lu Feng's progress was obvious. His strength was something that one would never understand if they had not clashed with him. Finally, many geniuses and demons walked into the crack and completely disappeared from this world. Looking at their departing figures, the 7 invincible almighties of the human race walked together. The Northern Palace progenitor sighed and slowly said, "I wonder how many of them will be able to walk out alive this time." Hearing this, the Lu family's great ancestor smiled. If it was in the past, that would be difficult to say. However, this time, with the existence of the monarch, all of this is nothing. It's a pity that you won't be able to see Lu Feng's current strength. All of a sudden, the other invincible almighties revealed strange expressions. Previously, when Lu Feng created a shocking sacred miracle outside the capital planet, the Northern Palace progenitor and the Southern Palace progenitor witnessed it with their own eyes. They even gave Lu Feng the king's prayer. They were aware of Lu Feng's strength. However, at this moment, the Lu family's great ancestor said such words. This could only prove one thing. That was, Lu Feng had become even more powerful in the past month. He had become even more terrifyingly powerful. He was so powerful that this alchemy Saint Lu, who had always been incomparably rational, actually had absolute confidence. Time and space had changed, the world had changed, and all changes had taken place in a single thought. Lu Feng was no stranger to this feeling. This was because when he was transported to planet Cohen and when he returned to the modern realm from the foreign battlefield, he felt the same way. He understood that this was an illusion brought about by traveling through time and space. In the next moment, the haziness in front of him finally disappeared completely. Everything appeared before him. This feeling is really comfortable. Breathing in this primitive aura made Lu Feng feel extremely comfortable. The aura here was different from the primitive universe. Here, even the air seemed to be filled with a kind of free nomological laws and power. At this moment, Lu Feng felt as if he had returned to the foreign battlefield. This was because only in the foreign battlefield could he breathe in everything so comfortably and feel the abundant aura and environment for cultivation. After waiting for a while and confirming that no one had entered, Lu Feng finally walked forward. The place where one entered was random and completely unpredictable. However, there was a slight similarity. The place where they appeared was very close to the altar in the center. One had to know that although the existence of this ruin could not be compared to the foreign battlefield, in terms of size, it was absolutely incomparably terrifying. If one appeared at the edge, then for those who had not reached the god level, they would probably never be able to reach the altar in their lifetime. The altar would only be open for a month. Generally, a month was enough time for all the geniuses and monsters who had not fallen to arrive at the altar. This was enough to prove that the place where these people appeared was around the altar. According to what I said before, it seems that as long as one identifies a direction, one can reach the altar. The existence of this place is protected by a kind of theorem, and it is the existence of this theorem that determines everything. The laws here were different from those of the original universe. At this moment, there was an independent space-time law. The law defined here was that as long as one followed a direction, one could eventually reach the altar. This was very interesting to Lu Fenglai. After all, to be able to condense such a law that violated all the laws, there was no doubt that the creator of this place was extremely terrifying and matchless power. Chapter 656. No matter what, I should hurry to the altar. After all, this place will only exist for a month. A month was not a long time, but it was not a short time either. After all, according to normal circumstances, it would take about 2 days to travel. However, Lu Feng did not know how long he could cultivate in the altar as the taboo monarch. If it was really long, he would have to wait for thousands of years if he missed the time to return from the altar. In this era of War of the Kings, there was no doubt that Lu Feng would never allow this. Therefore, he had to complete everything as soon as possible. Along the way, Lu Feng chose a direction and began to fly quickly. Along the way, Lu Feng also saw many divine objects. Among them, there were even peak 6th grade divine objects. However, at this moment, Lu Feng did not care about these. In his eyes, there was only the front. Originally, Lu Feng's speed was very terrifying. However, after flying for a few minutes, he suddenly felt the world shaking. In an instant, a look of horror appeared on Lu Feng's face. This feeling, perhaps others did not know, but Lu Feng was very clear about it. Back in the foreign battlefield, in order to be able to fight against the Demon King, Lu Feng relied on the help of Grandmaster Wang Gui to find an extinct planet. He trained in various difficult environments on that planet in order to break through as soon as possible. The terrifying fluctuations at this moment were exactly the same as what he felt back then. Naturally, Lu Feng also understood that this ruin was actually an incomparably vast space continent. There was no planet on it, and this feeling was undoubtedly an environment created by the laws here. This should be a natural disaster. Lu Feng sighed softly, but his expression did not change much. His speed was still terrifying, and there was not the slightest pause. He knew that although this environment was terrifying, he could withstand it when he was only at the initial stage of upheaval transformation. Now that he had reached the peak of the perfect stage and become the purple-gold great demon, he was naturally even more fearless. There was a faint smile at the corner of his mouth. If it's possible, It's not a bad idea to cultivate here. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time. To Lu Feng, such a harsh environment was actually a cultivation paradise. In this place, his great devil true body could definitely improve at an unimaginable speed. However, it was a pity that these disasters were too weak for him to break through. Moreover, Lu Feng only had a month's time. Compared to entering the altar, this was obviously nothing. Lu Feng didn't slow down in the slightest. It was as if his attitude had angered the laws here. Faintly, a terrifying calamity had already been born. Countless destructive storms swept towards Lu Feng, howling as they came. If Lu Feng continued to fly at this speed, he would probably encounter those destructive storms. However, Lu Feng didn't seem to care about them at all. He was still the same as before. But this is far from enough. It was far from enough. It was far from enough. The tribulations he had experienced were much, much more powerful than these. If it was someone else here, they might be incomparably fearful and stop. However, these were child's play to Lu Feng. Therefore, Lu Feng was even more powerful. Time travel, time travel. Ignoring those terrifying disasters, Lu Feng interpreted the existence of violence. Everything he encountered was smashed with a punch. Everything he encountered was forceful travel. In an instant, the destructive storms disappeared. The erupting volcanoes disappeared. The world of lava disappeared. Everything was constantly disappearing. After passing through everything, Lu Feng was still the same as before. However, a strange look appeared in his eyes. Finally, he turned back to look at the path he had taken. Lu Feng frowned slightly. The disasters here are really interesting. Lu Feng could feel that after he passed through those disasters and shattered them, there would always be some inexplicable power entering his body. If it wasn't for Lu Feng's keen observation, he wouldn't have been able to discover these powers. Although there weren't many of them entering his body each time. After going through so many tribulations, the number was incomparably terrifying. They were silent in Lu Feng's body. It seemed like they were waiting to accumulate to a certain extent before giving Lu Feng the most terrifying extermination. However, Lu Feng smiled again. It was the kind of smile that didn't matter at all. You want to stop me with this? This is simply impossible. In the next moment, the power of the great devil true body was activated again. In an instant, those strange and mysterious powers seemed to have met their natural nemesis and disappeared instantly. The existence of the great devil true body was originally created to deal with all disasters. These powers can't even be considered as disasters to the current me. They can't affect me at all. Lu Feng's speed became faster and faster. The disasters in front of him also became more and more powerful. Finally, for the first time, Lu Feng's speed slowed down a little. At this moment, a look of understanding flashed across Lu Feng's eyes. It seems like this is actually a world of tempering. Different tempering will appear according to different people. Otherwise, if all the trials are of this level, then I'm afraid that only a few people will be able to walk to the end. At this moment, even a terrifying existence like Lu Feng slowed down. If it were anyone else, they would have died in an instant. Every time someone died here, most of them died because of man-made disasters. The second most common was beast disasters. These two accounted for about 90% of the deaths. It was clear that if all the disasters were of this level, everyone would probably die. His speed was gradually lowered to the lowest. Lu Feng knew that if he continued to be so strong, then the disasters he would face would be even more terrifying. Although he was arrogant, he wasn't an idiot. Lu Feng knew that the current him didn't have the ability to contend with a remnant law. Therefore, he could only slow down. Sure enough, as Lu Feng's speed slowed down, the degree of destruction also decreased slightly. This was no longer a big deal for Lu Feng. After shuttling back and forth like this for a few hours, Lu Feng suddenly thought of something. His speed increased once again. However, this time, Lu Feng didn't reach his limit. Instead, he kept increasing it. Finally, when his speed reached a certain level, he started to move forward at a constant speed. The disasters that appeared at this moment were undoubtedly extremely terrifying. However, This kind of horror wasn't completely unbearable for Lu Fenglai. This was just the edge of his limit. Lu Feng was just that crazy. Even in such an environment, all he thought about was cultivation. At the moment, Lu Feng wanted to make use of this endless tribulation to cultivate. As he kept moving forward, Lu Feng felt that his cultivation base was undergoing a terrifying transformation. After clashing with Lu Luo for a few days, Lu Feng had reached the pinnacle. He had entered a state of extreme perfection. If there was another shocking collision, a life and death experience, Lu Feng would be able to break through. Obviously, this kind of environment seemed to be the most suitable place. 1 hour, 2 hours. In the blink of an eye, 3 hours had passed. Lu Feng's face was pale and his body was trembling. However, there was an immortal flame in his eyes, a kind of crazy persistence. Finally, when the 5th hour arrived, a terrifying fluctuation appeared in Lu Feng's eyes. Soon, I will be able to. Soon, you would be able to. This didn't mean that he was about to leave this place. Instead, Lu Feng felt that the terrifying shackles in his body were about to shatter. He was about to break through. Break through. That was a very exciting word. Although breaking through was a common occurrence for Lu Fenglai, he was still very excited to break through at this moment. After all, once he broke through, his strength would enter a whole new level, a level that was even more terrifying and close to the level of the previous generation's supreme evildoers. Finally, as a terrifying fluctuation spread, the entire sky and earth trembled completely. At the moment, Lu Feng had already stopped in midair. The calamity in the void didn't disappear. Instead, it surged towards Lu Feng even more violently and terrifyingly. This was a true extreme calamity. Even a terrifying existence like Lu Luo, who could suppress ordinary true gods, will be severely injured in an instant. However, in the face of this, Lu Feng simply didn't care. He was completely indifferent. There was only madness left in his eyes. As he sensed this endless calamity, Lu Feng's voice spread throughout the sky and earth at this moment. Come on, let's continue. Help me refine this supreme combat body and refine my path to invincibility. It seemed to have heard Lu Feng shout and felt Lu Feng's crazy provocation. At this moment, the sky was angry. Countless destructive power descended. This kind of power was enough to turn a super, life-sustaining planet into ashes in an instant. Naturally, in the face of such a calamity, Lu Feng's body started to collapse. He didn't use any power. He relied solely on the power of his physical body to wander in this endless calamity. Lu Feng's eyes were crazy. He didn't care about the melting of his body or the pain of his soul at all. What he cared about was the improvement of his cultivation level. He had experienced too much pain, so much so that he could no longer remember it clearly. Therefore, he didn't care about the calamity. Soon it would be there. Soon it would be there. Finally, as an even more extreme wave of energy spread out, the void shattered. At this moment, an existence of light appeared in the pale white sky. In an instant, a second light appeared, followed by a third. In an instant, countless lights appeared in the entire sky. They were so dense that they filled every corner of the sky. Some of the existences in the distance who saw this scene had strange expressions on their faces. Finally, someone murmured, "What's going on? Is this calamity really so terrifying that it can even attract the endless stars and turn them into a destructive power?" Many geniuses and monstrous geniuses paled at the sight of this. If it was really the endless stars, then unless one was a true god, no one could resist it. Endless stars. Although they were just stars, they still existed. However, their existence carried a supreme destructive power of heaven and earth. They were the pinnacle of destruction, the fragments of the 9 heaven stars. Chapter 657. The 9 sky stars was a disaster that could destroy the universe. It was a horrible disaster that would only appear during the great calamity of the universe. Once it appeared, it would lead to the destruction of a universe. As for these endless stars, although they were only fragments of the 9 heaven stars, the degree of terror was already unparalleled. Under normal circumstances, a real god would be able to destroy a star with a gentle wave of his arm. However, when faced with an endless number of stars, they would be incomparably fearful and would not dare to provoke them rashly. At this moment, countless stars were born in this place. This caused many existences to be completely shocked and at a loss. In the next moment, an existence seemed to have thought of something, and his expression changed slightly. No, this is not the outside world, not the original universe. This is a completely independent world. How can there be endless stars here? This isn't a real star at all. It's a vision, a shocking vision. Could it be that a horrible being is breaking through? Gradually, many people thought of this point, and their expressions became incomparably ugly. Those who could enter here were all below the level of God. However, there was never a being below the level of God who could trigger such a vision. At this moment, they were thinking hard. Soon, the beings from the human race laughed, and the beings from the nether race were sad. They all thought of a common person, because other than him, there was no other existence that could cause such a shocking phenomenon. It is an emperor. Horrible, horrible. He has broken through again. How long has it been? How long has it been since he broke through? How can he become a demigod so quickly? This is impossible. I don't believe it. Countless beings exclaimed. They really could not believe it. Previously, Lu Feng was only at the peak of the perfect stage, and he was able to kill and suppress a true god. Once he stepped into the realm of demigod and began the true path of transcendence, then at that time, who would be able to go against Lu Feng? Even young Nether King, who was at the second level of the demigod realm, would not be his match. At this moment, the beings from the Nether race all had the same thought. Faster, faster, faster. They had to enter the altar before the emperors of the human race arrived. Only in this way could they ensure their survival and safety. Enter the altar. Once you finish cultivating, you can be teleported away. Battles are not allowed within the altar. So, as long as we enter that place, we'll be safe. Many geniuses and monstrous geniuses of the netherworld went crazy. In this strange space, no tools could be used. It could be said that after entering this place, they had lost all means of survival in the original universe. They understood that if they encountered Lu Feng like this, they would die in an instant. Therefore, they had to be fast, even faster. This was related to his life. Soon, many humans noticed the same thing. All the geniuses and monstrous geniuses of a Nether clan were advancing crazily. They didn't even collect the divine objects that appeared around them. They were clearly stronger than some of the human geniuses, but they didn't have any will to fight. Their only thoughts seemed to be to madly advance. Of course, only a few monstrous geniuses and monstrous geniuses of the Nether clan were in such a state of madness. After all, only a few people were able to see the phenomenon of Lu Feng's breakthrough. However, even so, it saved the human race a lot of chances of dying. Bathed in endless calamities, Lu Feng finally completed the most thorough transformation. He finally made a complete breakthrough. Divine light flowed around his body. Above the boundless sky, countless illusory images of stars were constantly reflected. At this moment, an endless amount of power began to madly surge into Lu Feng's body. The trajectories of various stars were engraved in Lu Feng's body just like that. Stars. This was the power of stars. Although he didn't use any power, Lu Feng had an inexplicable feeling at this moment. That feeling was that when he completely stabilized, his body would carry the terrifying power of stars. The power of stars was a supreme power, a true supreme power. Although it wasn't the pinnacle of supreme power, in terms of destructive power, it was more terrifying than many pinnacle supreme powers. The power of stars belonged to the pinnacle, the power of destruction that almost surpassed the existence of supreme powers. This was a power that was born for the sake of destruction. If Lu Feng had time to comprehend it, then he might even be able to comprehend the seventh supreme power, the power of stars. Just as Lu Feng felt that the fourth level of the Great Devil True Body, the Great Devil Body, was about to take shape, and even more terrifying powers surged. Lu Feng was stunned, and Lu Feng became even crazier and more excited. Bloodline surge. Shackles. Shatter. Bloodline shackles. This was the existence of the bloodline shackles. Lu Feng actually broke the bloodline shackles at the same time. He actually, at such a time, in such a place, in such a space, underwent a second bloodline awakening. The god-descendant bloodline still had 3 chances to awaken the bloodline. The first time was to awaken the bloodline. The second time was to become a god. And the third time was to become a heavenly god. Originally, Lu Feng thought that he would have to wait until he became a god before he could awaken his bloodline for the second time. Who would have thought that he would awaken his bloodline for the second time when he had just stepped into the demigod realm? Undoubtedly, this was an unbelievable scene. No one would have thought that Lu Feng would be able to awaken his bloodline for the second time under such circumstances. In this way, even if he didn't break through, his strength would be endless and terrifying, and he would also surpass his previous strength. Just the bloodline awakening of Lu Feng alone was enough to crush any ordinary true god existence. Now that he had experienced a breakthrough, Lu Feng was even more terrifying, and it was hard to believe. Quietly feeling the surge of power in his body, Lu Feng's eyes shone with a shocking light. At this moment, his power was abnormally terrifying. Looking at the endless space and time, it would be an extreme. My physical body is terrifying. I finally broke through. Previously, Lu Feng's physical body had a 7-fold increase, but now it had reached a terrifying 8-fold increase. Moreover, as an existence who sealed his bloodline, he would have 4 chances to awaken his bloodline. Every time his bloodline awakened, coupled with the terror of the great demon true body, it would be enough to double the increase. 2 more times, even if he didn't have any fortuitous encounters, when he became a heavenly god, his physical body would be able to increase 10-fold. One had to know that among the 3 great forbidden mythological domains of the Divine King, the physical body forbidden mythological domain was one of them. Entering this domain, the strength of one's physical body would increase by 11 times. Usually, the Divine King's physical body would only be around 10 times stronger. In other words, as long as Lu Feng became a heavenly god existence, he would be equivalent to the normal physical body of the Divine King. Is this the terror of my bloodline and the great demon true body? In the future, I will really be so terrifying, so unparalleled. Martial Path Incarnation could break through. Lu Feng had absolute confidence in this. After all, his Martial Path Incarnation had displayed a terror that surpassed that of the Sovereign Path Incarnation. Lu Feng also had confidence in his current physical body. After all, he hadn't used any divine items to strengthen his physical body. In addition to the terror of the late-stage Great Demon True Body, it wouldn't be too big of a problem for him to enter the forbidden mythological domain. As for the final cultivation technique, Lu Feng was even more confident in it. Because he had the existence of the divine origin, his comprehension was absolutely extreme. In addition to his self-confidence, Lu Feng believed that his soul supremacy could definitely enter the mythological domain as well. As for the 3 great forbidden mythological domains, he had great confidence in breaking through them. As long as he became the supreme divine king, he might even be able to break through all 3 domains at the same time. At that time, he would directly surpass the supreme divine king, surpass the Overlord of time, and directly enter the level of the Overlord of the epic. Back then, when the supreme human king had become the supreme divine king, he had shattered 2 of the divine king's forbidden mythological domains at once and instantly become the Overlord of time. And now, according to his estimations, Lu Feng could even surpass the supreme human king in the final domain and enter the even more powerful forbidden domain, directly becoming a true overlord of the epic. The most crucial part of becoming a supreme overlord is the legendary forbidden combat strength mythological domain. And this forbidden combat strength mythological domain is the Emperor's domain. Legend has it that the existence of the Battle of the Kings will eventually enter the Emperor's domain. However, they will always enter the domain of the false Emperor. Lu Feng knew this as well. This was an inexplicable part of his memory. He didn't know where it came from, nor did he know where it came from. However, there was such a memory in Lu Feng's mind, and he couldn't remember the time when this memory appeared. However, Lu Feng could confirm that the final victors of the Battle of the Kings had all entered the domain of the false Emperor. Therefore, they couldn't possess the true power of the Emperor's domain. They couldn't shatter the forbidden combat strength mythological domain, and they were still overlords of the epic. They couldn't enter the realm of the supreme overlord. According to my memory, only the appearance of the taboo monarch can truly open the Emperor's domain, and only then can the forbidden combat strength mythological domain appear and become a true supreme overlord. If I want to truly be comparable to my ancestor, the supreme human king, then I must win this Battle of the Kings. I must win completely and stand at the ultimate peak. Only then can I truly become a supreme overlord. Lu Feng also understood this, and he knew that the other taboo monarchs were also aware of this. Otherwise, why would they travel through endless time and space just for the right time like this? One had to know that they had experienced countless eras and eras, and they had also experienced many Battle of the Kings. If they really wanted to become an overlord of the epic, then Lu Feng believed that the existence of the taboo monarch could definitely be easily achieved, even in an era without a Battle of the Kings. Therefore, they gave up everything and traveled through endless eras to this era for the sake of the true Emperor's domain, the realm of the supreme overlord. For this Battle of the Kings, Lu Feng's insistence in his heart was mostly because of his Emperor title, and because of his character, he absolutely couldn't lose to anyone. And now, with the existence of the forbidden combat strength mythological domain, he had even more reasons to persist. He had to persist and win. Only then could he be truly invincible for an era. His eyes slowly closed once more. This was because Lu Feng felt that the power of the bloodline recovery was slowly fading, and the breakthrough of the star great demon body was finally about to be completed. Everything was about to be completed. Chapter 658. The wind and clouds were colorless. Heaven and earth were dim. The endless constellations had completely disappeared. The only thing that remained was the extremely gloomy sky. It was as if doomsday had truly arrived. It was as if the entire universe was about to sink into a terrifying vision. However, Lu Feng's eyes were still tightly shut in the face of this. He was not looking at anything at all. Or rather, he could not see anything at all. The first tier of demigod was the deification of the physical body. It was to refine the physical body into a quasi-divine body. It was a process of shedding one's mortal body. Although it did not strengthen the physical body by much, it would carry a trace of divine imprint. There was no doubt that this was also an extreme strengthening. Moreover, only by truly deifying the physical body could one be qualified to have a supreme divine body. At this moment, Lu Feng was quietly perceiving the process of the mythical transformation of the physical body. Finally, the dark clouds in the sky became extremely dense. The next moment, endless ferocious lightning filled the air vaguely. It was as if it would descend on the mortal world in the next moment. In such an oppressive atmosphere, even deities would have to crawl and tremble. They would have to constantly retreat and endure the most terrifying disaster. However, Lu Feng was still the same as before. He had not changed in the slightest. He seemed to have truly sunk into depravity. Looking at the vision in the distance, many monstrous geniuses of the underworld and the human race stopped in their tracks. They stared quietly. After a long time, they finally discovered something. Their expressions were extremely strange. According to ancient legends, when a heaven-defying combat body is born, the the most terrifying punishment will befall and completely obliterate the heaven-defying combat body. A long time ago, there were supreme existences who had condensed the most terrifying and heaven-defying battle physique. However, in the end, they were completely obliterated by endless tribulations. There was only one person who was able to break free from the shackles of endless tribulations and condense the most terrifying battle physique. He is only at the Divine King Supremacy realm. However, he is not weaker than an epic overlord by relying entirely on his invincible combat body. These people were the true peak existences of the underworld and the human race. They knew countless secrets and naturally had heard of this matter. Being able to fight against the overlord of an epoch with the Divine King's supreme battle physique alone is unbelievably terrifying. However, it's a pity that even though he had the strongest combat strength, he couldn't enter the final domain and reach the Overlord realm. In the end, he could only come to an end. He couldn't even leave his name behind. This was the sorrow of an era. Since ancient times, many powerful eras have been like this. They all had unparalleled combat strength that could be compared to or even surpass the strength of those famous eras other than the primitive immortal devil era. However, because they were unable to reach the true realm, they were unable to become the true overlords of their eras. In the end, all of them came to an end. Sorrow. This is the sorrow and helplessness of every era. At this moment, both the geniuses of the underworld race and the freaks of the human race sighed helplessly. However, their expressions all disappeared in the next moment, because in the distance, the terrifying calamity had finally arrived. World-ending calamity. This is definitely a world-ending calamity. The phenomenon of the 9 heavens thunder, 9 heavens gale, 9 heavens karmic fire, and 9 heaven stars. Legend has it that the world-ending calamity is made up of the 4 9 heavens calamities. Now all of them have appeared. What kind of terrifying battle physique did the Emperor condense? The 9 heavens calamity. This was all the power of the 9 heavens calamity. The invincible battle physique in the past only went through 3 kinds of calamities. He didn't show the final phenomenon of the 9 heaven stars. However, the battle body that the Emperor is about to condense has even summoned the final calamity of the apocalypse. Once he succeeds, this will be the most terrifying, invincible battle physique in history. Unlike the underworld race's geniuses and freaks, the humans all went crazy. In the eyes of the underworld race, Lu Feng was bound to fail. However, the humans all believed that Lu Feng could succeed. Because he was the Emperor, the Emperor was synonymous with a miracle. He was the complete embodiment of a miracle. During the Battle of the Sacred Remains, Lu Feng had fought a true god who had condensed a supreme, divine physique. When everyone thought that Lu Feng would fail, when even the Lu family's ancestors thought that Lu Feng couldn't succeed, he had still succeeded. He had completed the most incredible reversal in history. He had actually succeeded. Although this calamity was going to be the most terrifying in history, they still believed that Lu Feng could succeed. Finally, the calamity came. The 9 heavens thunder came, tearing the void apart and destroying the mortal world. At this moment, the entire ruin seemed to be shaking. It was as if the entire space and time were shattering. It's just a phenomenon. How can it have such power? This is simply impossible. Even a true god wouldn't be able to survive such a calamity, let alone a peak demigod emperor or a true god. They wouldn't be able to leave safely. The Emperor is dead for sure. The existence of the Nether race had already determined that Lu Feng was going to die. The Emperor was going to die completely. However, in the next moment, Lu Feng appeared. Lu Feng's performance proved and explained that the existence of an emperor was truly unparalleled and mighty. His eyes were still tightly shut. There wasn't even the slightest movement in his body. Lu Feng was still in a daze. Finally, all the calamities came and fell on Lu Feng's body. The series of lightning was a baptism of calamity. If it had been any other existence, even a true god, they would have been turned into ashes in an instant. However, the current Lu Feng was completely different from before. He wasn't the slightest bit shaken. He was still as calm as ever. Back then, Godslayer Lu Tao possessed a complete and rich human monarch bloodline. His physical body was incomparably terrifying. Even so, he only managed to obtain 7 times the strength of his physical body after becoming a true god. However, Lu Feng was now 8 times stronger. His strength was simply unbelievable. Countless cracks appeared all over his body. A clear and transparent color slowly flowed out of Lu Feng's body. This was Lu Feng's blood. In the past, his blood had been red, then bronze, then gold, and finally purple gold. But now, after he had condensed the star great demon body, the color of his blood had changed once more, finally becoming a transparent color. Although his physical body was 8 times stronger, Lu Feng would definitely not be able to withstand the bombardment of the 9 heavens profound thunder anomaly without any defense. However, his bloodline was still there. The most terrifying recovery speed was vividly displayed at this moment. In an instant, the damaged parts began to repair. Almost in the blink of an eye, he was restored to his previous state. As the 9 heavens Xian thunder continued to descend from the sky, Lu Feng's bloodline was also constantly surging. It was constantly reaching its peak and recovering. Lu Feng's body was constantly trembling. He seemed to have reached his limit. However, when the limit was reached, an inexplicable mystery would appear and adhere to the surface of Lu Feng's body. These inexplicable mysteries seemed to be absorbing the destructive power and annihilating it. Therefore, every time he trembled, every time he reached his limit, Lu Feng would be able to recover at the fastest speed. It was to the extent that the energy that covered the sky was actually becoming stronger. After an unknown amount of time, the 9 heavens' mysterious lightning phenomenon finally disappeared completely. Their calamity had completely passed and turned into nothingness. Seeing this scene, more and more underworld race and human race existences in the distance stopped in their tracks. Their eyes were filled with different colors. These people knew that the calamity in the sky hadn't dissipated. This meant that the calamity hadn't passed yet. This meant that Lu Feng hadn't died yet. He was still alive. It's only the first calamity. He has the human monarch bloodline and that terrifying great demonic body. It's normal for him to be able to endure it. Since ancient times, many heaven-defying battle constitutions have been completely destroyed by the first calamity. There were very few people who could survive the first calamity. However, these people weren't surprised that Lu Feng could succeed. After all, Lu Feng was an emperor. 4-level calamity. This is the most complete and complete calamity. It's definitely the most terrifying calamity in history. How many calamities can an emperor withstand? In the past, the Divine King was able to challenge the Overlord of the epoch because he had completely passed 3 calamities. Now, Lu Feng had passed 4 calamities. The existences of the underworld race believed that Lu Feng should be able to pass 3 calamities. However, it was absolutely impossible for him to pass 4 calamities. They were all waiting for the moment Lu Feng perished. Under everyone's anticipation, the second calamity of the Black Wind calamity had finally descended. Unlike the destructive power of the Black Lightning, the Black Wind calamity seemed to be able to penetrate deep into one's soul and completely destroy it. Such a calamity was the most terrifying to many existences. After all, the existence of one soul was the foundation of a person. Martialists didn't have as many soul defense methods as Psyche masters. When faced with such a calamity, they would usually forcefully endure it. They didn't have any means of dealing with it. However, Lu Feng wasn't like those people. He wasn't just a peak perfect stage warrior. He was also a peak Psyche master. His strength couldn't be measured at this level. If it had been any other martialist, they wouldn't have been able to withstand it. After all, the second calamity had appeared entirely to obliterate the martialist. However, this was nothing to Lu Feng. After all, Lu Feng's strongest point was his soul. Chapter 659. Inside Shun Yuan's spiritual sea, there was an endless churning. Monstrous waves kept appearing. In an instant, the violent Xian wind was completely annihilated. It was completely annihilated by the endless waves. In Shun Yuan's spiritual sea, Lu Feng looked coldly at everything in front of him. At this moment, he seemed to have become another existence. A supreme existence that had truly existed since ancient times. His eyes were so cold. This was not the kind of indifference one would have when looking down on an ant. Instead, it was a kind of extreme coldness that made one feel as if they were completely ignored. When the strongest Xian wind arrived in front of Lu Feng's spiritual sea, his cold eyes were still as calm as ever. In the next moment, he gently waved his arm, and everything disappeared. What a terrifying monarch! He passed the second stage. The time he used was much shorter than the first stage. What about the third stage? Can he succeed in the burning of the endless karmic fire? The karmic fire still descended. It did not have a root, it did not have a trace. In a blink of an eye, it appeared around Lu Feng's body. This was the karmic fire. As long as it existed, it would continue to burn. It would continue to burn from the beginning. Nothing could erase it or extinguish it. The karmic fire calamity is one of the most terrifying calamities. As long as living beings exist, there will be karma involved. There will be the fetters of fate. Everything will ignite the karmic fire. Once it burns, it will burn everything until nothing is left. The first stage, the Xian lightning calamity, is a test of the physical body. The second stage, the Xian wind calamity, is a calamity for martialists. Then, the third stage is the final test for psychic masters, or perhaps for all existences. Monarch, can you create another sacred miracle? Legend had it that the karmic fire of 3 calamities was the ultimate test. Since ancient times, only one of those who had condensed an invincible battle constitution had been able to pass the final test of karmic fire. Apart from him, no one else had succeeded. He, on the other hand, had only managed to summon 3 calamities. But now, Lu Feng had appeared with the 4 calamities, the most terrifying of them all. Everyone was quietly watching, anticipating, the karmic fire burning as if it wanted to burn Lu Feng to ashes. However, even under such endless torment, Lu Feng's eyes did not open. Tyrannical. This was tyrannical. This was Lu Feng's peerless tyranny. If it were any other existence, even if they felt the majesty of this world-ending tribulation, they would have been awakened and would have had to concentrate on welcoming this terrifying arrival. However, Lu Feng did not change at all until the third tribulation, the most powerful tribulation that had ever appeared in history. His pupils did not even open. This was tyrannical. Unfortunately, no one could see Lu Feng's current state, so they would not understand how terrifying Lu Feng was. If they saw this scene, they would definitely not doubt Lu Feng's existence anymore. The endless flames burned continuously. This was an extremely terrifying punishment. It seemed as if Lu Feng's soul was also burning intensely. Vaguely, one could see countless real and illusory flames appear in his body. The real flames were burning the physical body, while the illusory flames were burning Lu Feng's soul and the entanglement of karma. This was a kind of pain, a pain that caused both the soul and the physical body to suffer. The true essence of the third tribulation was the annihilation of living beings in pain. Once this pain exceeded the limit, once one could no longer persist in staying awake in this endless pain, everything would be completely burned away in an instant and be completely annihilated into nothingness. This was the true essence of the karmic fire tribulation. In the midst of the endless flames, Lu Feng's face finally distorted slightly. However, after a moment, this distorted color disappeared completely. Other people would find it hard to bear, but all this was nothing to Lu Feng. In the 2 years since his debut, The pain he had experienced was simply incalculable. The baptism of the illusion had strengthened his soul. In the abyss of massacre, he had experienced hundreds of millions of life and death situations, which had forged his ability to bear everything to the extreme. At that time, Lu Feng had not even been a martialist. However, he had still been able to bear it and return from the brink of death. This was him. This was his emperor, Lu Feng. Now, this burning pain could no longer shake Lu Feng in the slightest. The true essence of the third tribulation is to burn everything. However, this burning cannot completely destroy everything. This is because the karmic fire has a cause and an effect. If this cause does not appear, then the effect will not exist. And this cause is the pain that surpasses the limit. Only pain that surpasses the limit is the cause of all annihilation. Once you can no longer endure it, then the effect will appear. The underworld race's existence had a cold, mocking look in his eyes. Although they had never experienced it, they could imagine how terrifying this pain was. The Emperor is just a monstrous genius with incomparable talent. After all, he is not of the older generation. He has experienced so many hardships, so this pain can really be considered the ultimate tribulation that will destroy him. Countless underworld race existences did not know Lu Feng very well. They knew how terrifying Lu Feng was and how powerful Lu Feng was. However, in their eyes, the reason for all this was Lu Feng's shocking talent and the protection of a human race. This had nothing to do with Lu Feng's own hard work. The being who condensed the supreme body, the being who could possess the battle power of an overlord of an era, even though he was only a supreme being of the universe. He only went through trials and tribulations after he became a heavenly god. Legend has it that he seemed to be unable to withstand this painful tribulation. In the end, he chose to rely on strength to prove his Tao and forcibly cut off all the existences and relationships that were related to him. Relying on this, he finally escaped the fate of annihilation, survived 3 major tribulations, and became the person with the first battle body since ancient times. How will the Emperor choose? Countless people were paying attention. When they saw the sky turn into a sea of blood, the same kind of expression finally appeared on their faces. It was a kind of nervousness. The human race was nervous because Lu Feng would fail. The underworld race was nervous because they were afraid that Lu Feng would succeed. The greatest pain is coming. Emperor, can you succeed? Emperor, you can definitely succeed. You bear all the dreams of the younger generation. You bear the hope of the human race's rise. You can't fail. The younger generation of the human race all had determined looks in their eyes. It was just like in the past, when they believed that Lu Feng could succeed and complete the divine relic. Even if billions of existences denied it, even if all of them believed it. But in their hearts, in their eyes, the Emperor's existence was the only existence. You can't fail. As if to confirm the thoughts of the younger generation of the human race, the flames in the void gradually extinguished and were completely extinguished just like that. However, the final tribulation, the 9 stars in the sky, was still there. They floated quietly, as if they would descend in the next moment. Although this was the final tribulation, a tribulation that many people believed that no one could survive, they also knew that Lu Feng had succeeded. Because this tribulation didn't disappear, it meant that Lu Feng hadn't failed. He had really survived the Hellfire disaster. Could it be that he also learned from that terrifying existence in the past and cut off all the fetters? Emperor, he also chose to run away in the end. Cutting off all ties was tantamount to running away. Many of the underworld race's younger generation looked at all this with a trace of disdain in their eyes. Although they knew that this was the only way to pass the tribulation, they still couldn't help but mock him when it really happened. After all, the one who was about to pass the tribulation was the Emperor. Lu Feng had created too many miracles and sacred relics. His existence was proof that he didn't need any embellishments. Therefore, although Lu Feng had succeeded in the end, the underworld race's younger generation couldn't help but mock and despise him. Emperor, you're just so. The underworld race's genius exhaled softly. Although he felt a lot of regret about Lu Feng's success, this didn't stop him from despising Lu Feng. However, a moment later, when he wanted to continue paying attention to Lu Feng and see if Lu Feng could pass the final tribulation, a voice suddenly rang out in his ear. The Emperor is where the faith of the younger generation of the human race lies. He is where our hope lies. In the past, even if there was no chance of survival, even if he had to sink into oblivion for eternity, he never once retreated. This time it's the same. The Emperor will not retreat. The underworld race's genius was jolted awake when he heard this. He turned around and looked at the existence that had appeared behind him. His expression was extremely unsightly and gloomy. The underworld race's genius was only at the initial perfect stage. Although he was also a peak genius, his true combat strength was only at the peak perfect stage. However, the existence he was facing right now was truly at the peak perfect stage. Moreover, he was also a genius, a peak genius. Nanming Shang. Nanming Shang was the young master of the Nangong family. Nanming Shang. He had actually appeared here. Originally, when the underworld race and the human race met, the outcome would be decided in an instant. However, Nanming Shang didn't make a move this time. He only looked at the underworld race's genius with a mocking expression. Silence, endless silence. The underworld race's genius had calculated everything. However, to his dismay, he realized that he had no ability to resist in front of the young master of the Nangong family. Even escaping was impossible. Therefore, he had given up on resisting. He had given up on everything. The underworld race's genius, who had let go of everything and didn't even care about his own life, was no longer afraid of anything. He looked at Nanming Shang and finally spoke after a moment of silence. How do you know that the Emperor didn't rely on severing those connections and ultimately survived? Nanming Shang chuckled. He turned around slightly and looked in the direction where the 9 stars in the sky were surging and about to fall. After a long time, he slowly spoke. The Emperor's existence isn't something you can speculate about, nor are you qualified to speculate about. I said that he didn't sever anything and relied on himself to survive, because I am one of the connections that the Emperor has. I, Nanming Shang, once had connections with the Emperor. If he really did sever everything, how could I not sense it? Nanming Shang had interacted with him during the inter-college competition. Therefore, he had some connections with Lu Feng before. Then, in the void of the universe, Lu Feng had finally fallen in front of the true God, Rong Yuanyu, in his peak state. At that time, he was one of the earliest existences to appear in the void of the universe. Their prayers had already connected their fates to Lu Feng. At that time, all the geniuses and monsters who had done what they had done were deeply involved with Lu Feng. If Lu Feng had chosen to sever his connection with them, how could they not have sensed it? Furthermore, the Emperor's existence is synonymous with greatness and eternity. He is an existence that we all respect. If he chose to sever everything, how could the Emperor still be the Emperor? How could he still be the Emperor that we believe in? Chapter 660. Nanming Shang turned around and looked at the Nether Race's prodigy again. His eyes were burning with an extreme light, a kind of sacredness that made people tremble. This was faith. This was madness. This was a kind of affirmation, a supreme affirmation. And we firmly believe, the Emperor will definitely be the final victor of this era, the ultimate existence that will ascend to the peerless throne. The Emperor, Dao, domain, appeared for the sake of the Emperor. The Nether Race's prodigy wanted to mock, but when he saw the madness in Nanming Shang's eyes, he fell silent, completely silent. How could he not notice such an expression? This was a manifestation of faith to the extreme. He couldn't understand how Lu Feng, who was also of the younger generation, could at most be the idol of the human race's younger generation. How could Lu Feng become an existence of faith? Nanming Shang looked at the Nether Race's prodigy and finally returned to normal. He smiled and said slowly, "How about this? I'll make a bet with you. the nether race's prodigy was taken aback. He looked at Nanming Shang in disbelief. In the past, or even just now, whenever they met in the ruins, the human race and the nether race would fight to the death. Unless one side died, it wouldn't stop. But now, Nanming Shang wanted to make a bet with him, even though he was sure to win. Soon, the nether race's prodigy regained his composure and looked at Nanming Shang. Why do I have to say anything now? Since you want to bet, then let's bet. Nanming Shang nodded his head gently. Then this time, we'll use the Emperor as the stake. If he can't pass all the tests and condense the embryonic form of the ultimate invincible battle physique, then I'll let you go. How about? This was a chance to live. This was his only chance to live. How could he give up? Nodding, the nether race's prodigy looked at Nanming Shang. He wanted to say something, but didn't. In the end, he fell silent. In the endless void, the 9 heavenly stars phenomenon was so terrifying and extreme that it could sever the stars in time, shatter the world's space-time. In the past, Lu Feng had once condensed a star anomaly and added it to his body, finally forming the star Great Demon Body. However, what appeared at that time were only endless stars, fragments of the 9 heaven stars. Compared to the 9 heavenly stars, the power and strength of the endless stars were simply incalculable. Therefore, at this moment, the endless stars were the true ultimate disaster for Lu Feng. Time slowly passed. However, the calamity in the sky didn't descend. It just floated quietly in the air without the slightest fluctuation. Eventually, more and more existences were puzzled. They didn't understand, but they weren't too confused. The great calamity of the 9 heaven stars was truly an apocalyptic calamity. It was one of the ultimate powers of the great calamity of the universe. No one had ever seen its power when it descended. Everything that was known about it was passed down in legends. All the existences who had witnessed all of this eventually perished and died. Therefore, no one knew what the great calamity of the 9 heaven stars was all about. Gradually, a long time passed. An entire day had passed since the great calamity of the Supreme War Body began. Lu Feng basically completed the first 3 calamities in less than an hour. However, the last great calamity of the 9 heaven stars had indeed gone on for such a long time, but there was still no change. Finally, this caused countless existences to gradually become irritated. However, this situation did not last for long, because not long after, the phenomenon of the 9 heavenly stars in the sky began to slowly surge. I see it. I finally understand. It turns out that after waiting for so long, this calamity is accumulating power. It's actually condensing everything, accumulating power, to give the only blow, to give the most powerful blow. Emperor, let's see how you're going to run this time. The first 3 calamities had continuously descended, and the power of power had continuously increased. However, this calamity seemed to have caused the entire 9 heaven stars to surge, as if all of them were about to descend together. This proved one thing, and that was that the final tribulation would be completed with a single strike. Obviously, this kind of calamity was the most terrifying and the most difficult to resist. Gestation, endless gestation. Vaguely, there seemed to be a shocking power turbulence, causing the entire space-time to tremble in a terrifying manner. Countless cracks in the space-time began to appear, connecting the entire sky and crossing the entire space-time. All living beings were terrified, and they were unrestrained. No one had thought that a mere phenomenon, a mere accumulation of power, could produce such a shocking scene. Obviously, they had thought of the terrifying scene after the calamity descended. Emperor, this time you're finished. Many existences of the netherworld were roaring, trembling, and roaring. This was a kind of trembling of excitement. Such a calamity, not to mention Lu Feng, who was only at the perfect stage or who had become a demigod now. Even a true god would instantly perish in the face of this calamity. In their hearts, Lu Feng would undoubtedly die. At this moment, even the existences of the human race revealed a trace of worry. Although they firmly believed that Lu Feng would succeed in the end, they still couldn't help but feel worried when they saw this scene. After all, such a calamity could be said to be the end of the world. In the end, the calamity still descended. Endless nine heavens stars appeared in the void, but when they appeared in the gloomy sky of eternal death, they didn't immediately descend. Under the doubtful gaze of many existences, these nine heaven stars that could destroy the world actually began to transform. In the next moment, an incomparably ferocious and terrifying giant beast was born. Savage Lord. That's actually the projection of the Savage Lord. It's world-shaking, world-shaking. These nine heaven stars are actually condensing an endless amount of power, transforming into the appearance of the Savage Lord, and starting this ultimate attack. According to the legends, the Wildlands Lord was a descendant of one of the three supreme beast kings of the primordial behemoth during the immortal and devil era. It had an extremely rich bloodline of the immortal great beasts. At its peak, it could easily suppress any overlord of an era. At this moment, the nine heaven stars actually fused on their own to form this incomparably ferocious and terrifying beast king. This made many existences really shocked to the extreme. When an ordinary calamity takes the form of such a terrifying beast, it will increase the power of the immortal's power by hundreds or thousands of times, enough to truly destroy the world. Is the monarch battle physique really the most terrifying battle physique in the history of the universe? He actually triggered a calamity and took on such an invincible form. Everyone exclaimed in shock and horror. However, the calamity's arrival didn't end with their shock and exclamations, because it raised its head and roared as if it could destroy an era. The ferocious beast's head was enough to become the nightmare of any existence for the rest of their lives. As it gently descended, it carried with it an eternal might that could destroy everything. It caused the entire world to be annihilated. Countless nine heavenly stars gathered together. Finally, the complete nurturing of power caused the might of the nine heavenly stars' calamity to reach the limit of its illusory form. Under such a calamity, perhaps even the most powerful true god would be annihilated for eternity and disappear completely. As for Lu Feng, although he was terrifying, no one was optimistic about him at this moment. At the moment when the most terrifying pressure descended, Lu Feng opened his eyes for the first time. No one could see the expression in Lu Feng's eyes. It was an indescribable expression, a kind of extreme calmness, as if even billions of existences couldn't shake him in the slightest. He stood up gently, and the power that lingered around his body instantly returned to his body. At this moment, Lu Feng's body flickered with endless gorgeous colors. Although it was extremely transparent, that kind of brilliance was indescribably gorgeous. His head finally rose slowly. That kind of expression didn't change at all, as if he didn't care about everything in front of him at all. Finally, when the Savage Lord's vision descended, Lu Feng smiled. Invincible power requires an invincible battle body. If I lose the support of this invincible battle body, even if I destroy everything, I will also die, and I will be annihilated for eternity. So, roar, Lu Feng had invincible power. Once he activated all of his supreme power, once he used the supreme technique, his power would be infinitely terrifying. When he used the era of emperors or even the 1 billion mortal dust, 1 billion mortals, his power would far exceed his own limits. But at the same time, once he used these invincible means, his body would suffer the most terrible obliteration, almost to a state of decay. Therefore, Lu Feng had to condense an invincible battle body, the ultimate battle body that could bear his invincible power. And this time, it was the best opportunity. Looking at the Wildlands Lord, Lu Feng made his move. He didn't choose to defend passively, nor did he choose to be passive, because he was the emperor. He was the only emperor of truth since ancient times. As the great emperor of truth, how could he let others kill him? How could he passively bear it? What he wanted was to control. In his era, he was the greatest existence. Therefore, Lu Feng chose to kill. In front of the horrified eyes of the Netherworld race and the human race, Lu Feng's tiny body turned into the invincible shadow of the Great Emperor. He merged with the shadow of the Great Emperor, and he actually charged towards the endless void alone. The Emperor is crazy. This was the only thought in everyone's mind. Chapter 661. The Monarch had gone mad. The monarch had truly gone mad. If he hadn't gone mad, how could he have done such a crazy thing? Facing the great calamity alone, he didn't choose to defend himself. Instead, he chose to kill. If this wasn't madness, then what was? The collision instantly created the projection of the Great Emperor. Indeed, it was possible that it would become the #1 phenomenon since ancient times, the greatest figure in all of history. However, it was still in its embryonic form. Lu Feng had yet to reach the realm of great success. Thus, it was impossible for it to reach its peak state. It was also impossible for it to become the strongest manifestation since ancient times. However, the calamity it was facing was truly the most terrifying calamity phenomenon. It was indescribably terrifying. Therefore, it collapsed the moment it collided. The ferocious savage lord tore apart the monarch's body. It tore apart the monarch's robe and broke the monarch's crown. It was only a projection, an embryonic form of the great emperor's projection. It was impossible for it to collide with that terrifying calamity. It couldn't resist at all. Just like that, Lu Feng's body was exposed to the ferocious Beast King. His body was so small, but his opponent seemed to be the entire sky. This was a completely disproportionate confrontation. However, Lu Feng didn't show the slightest trace of fear. He just stood there quietly. It was as if the great emperor's manifestation that was being torn apart had nothing to do with him. At the final moment, the savage lord descended. Its terrifying claws were about to tear Lu Feng apart. It wanted to completely crush Lu Feng. At this moment, Lu Feng still didn't use any power. He was still so calm. It was so calm that it made people tremble. The beast claw that was bigger than 1,000,000 Lu Fengs finally arrived at Lu Feng's chest. As for Lu Feng, he was calm. He was extremely calm. He watched quietly. He was too calm and too calm. Countless existences exclaimed. Some were shocked, some were agitated, some were excited, some were sad, and some were sad. All of their emotions, regardless of whether they were good or bad, appeared at this moment. Finally, the sharp claw pierced through Lu Feng's body just like that. The sharp claws didn't tear Lu Feng to shreds, as they had imagined. The entire beast claw was annihilated in front of Lu Feng's chest. It turned into a beam of light and continuously entered Lu Feng's body. Lu Feng's eyes were slightly distorted due to extreme pain. His entire body was trembling slowly. At the same time, countless forces shot out from every corner of Lu Feng's body. This power seemed to penetrate Lu Feng's body, wanting to tear him into countless pieces. Lu Feng's appearance was incomparably bleak and gloomy. This was a true kind of great pain. It was a pain that tore the whole body apart. His expression was distorted, and his pupils were constantly dilating. However, if someone could see it, they would be able to clearly see that in the depths of Lu Feng's pupils, that scene was incomparably calm. Regardless of the turmoil of the world, regardless of the universe's obliteration, regardless of the pain, regardless of the collapse of the soul, Lu Feng's will still exist. It was incomparably firm and eternal as one. This was a kind of extreme state. At this moment, Lu Feng was in such an extremely terrifying state. Vaguely, countless transparent colors appeared. This was the blood in Lu Feng's body after he used the star great demon body. This was the supreme blood that had fused with the power of the stars and contained the power of the stars. It was a pity that Lu Feng had fused with the endless stars, and the endless stars were only fragments of the 9 heaven stars. There was simply no comparison between the two. Therefore, although he was facing the 9 heaven stars, and Lu Feng already possessed the power of the stars in Lu Feng's body was completely scattered the moment they collided. Half of the beast claw had already disappeared, but the savage lord still didn't stop. It didn't seem to care about any loss of power. It seemed like it wanted to rush its entire body into Lu Feng's body. Lu Feng's body was already trembling to an extreme extent. Every moment, there were billions of vibrations and countless amounts of blood flowed out. However, the strange thing was that the blood didn't disappear. After it was broken down into countless nothingness by this boundless power, it actually returned to the body once again. The blood was baptized and broken down, yet returned again and again and merged into the body, causing the power in the body to continue to increase and sublimate. Many geniuses from the underworld race and the human race could already see Lu Feng's current state. At this moment, everyone's faces were filled with endless shock and madness. Even the human race was the same. They finally understood Lu Feng's plan. An emperor. He is really an emperor. He is really crazy. What he's thinking about now isn't how to get through this terrifying tribulation. Instead, he wants to use this extreme tribulation to refine his body. He wants to use these countless tribulations to refine his body. Anyone who faced a tribulation would always be on the defensive. Of course, some heaven-defying and terrifying existences would choose to defy the heavens and rely on their own supreme power to forcefully shatter these tribulations. Such existences were considered heaven-defying geniuses that wouldn't appear even once in 1,000 years. However, Lu Feng was even more extreme. He actually didn't use the slightest bit of power. He actually chose to use his own body to endure this endless tribulation. He just wanted to use everything he had to refine his strongest physical body. After every tribulation, a kind of power will inevitably be bestowed upon him, allowing his physical body to improve tremendously. However, the emperor believes that this power is not enough. It is far from enough to enhance his own power. Therefore, he chose to use all of this power. Even if it is a tribulation, he wants to use it to temper his own body. This is too crazy. This was indeed too crazy. This was because no one had ever done something like this before. Therefore, when they saw this scene, they really couldn't hold back anymore. Lu Feng stood in the center of the endless tribulation. The power of the 9 heavenly stars turned into an endless and terrifying savage lord. Now, this savage lord was gradually disintegrating into endless power. This power wasn't something that could be absorbed because it contained the existence of the 9 heavenly stars. And what the 9 heavenly stars represented was the supreme power of destruction that surpassed the pinnacle of power. The power of destruction could never be absorbed. Therefore, the endless power of destruction that entered Lu Feng's body was wantonly destroying everything. Lu Feng didn't take any defensive measures. It seemed like he didn't put up any defenses at all, allowing this endless power to destroy his entire existence at will. This was tyrannical, an endless and terrifying tyrannical power. His eyes were already completely distorted by the pain. However, in the deepest part of his eyes, there was still only one image of his true self. This scene was enough to make anyone tremble in fear. The sharp claws of the savage lord had already completely entered Lu Feng's body. The brilliance that filled the sky made everyone tremble. It was indescribably terrifying. At the moment, Lu Feng seemed to be completely penetrated by the endless brilliance. Most of his body was bathed in this destructive power. Although it looked beautiful, everyone understood the kind of pain that came with it. This was the most beautiful kind of pain. Many underworld race geniuses and human race geniuses took a deep breath when they saw this. In their opinion, Lu Feng would be annihilated and turned to ashes the moment that power entered his body. However, who would have thought that he would actually hold on for so long? Even after those massive claws had completely penetrated his body, he still hadn't completely collapsed and perished. The willpower of an emperor is indeed incomparably shocking. He didn't even tremble in the slightest in the face of this suffering. If the second trial was an excruciating pain of life and death, then this trial is a fate worse than death. What this requires isn't just a terrifying physical body, but also a persevering willpower. An emperor's aptitude is unparalleled, and his willpower is even more terrifying. These people finally understood why Lu Feng was able to reach such a level. If it had only been because of his great aptitude, then perhaps he would have become the #1 genius of the human race, or even the #1 genius of the current era. However, he definitely wouldn't have been able to defeat a human king and become the #1 person in the same realm since time immemorial. Apart from his shocking talent, Lu Feng's willpower was the most terrifying thing in the world. Everything that had happened today was the best proof of this. Finally, the Savage Lord went completely crazy. His roar simply shook the heavens and caused billions of space-time spaces to start collapsing. He seemed to have understood Lu Feng's plan, although it was only a phantom existence. Once it condensed and took form, it would possess a portion of the original body's willpower projection. It was clear that this phantom, which was condensed from the endless stars of the nine skies, had obtained a lot of the Savage Lord's imprints from space-time. Therefore, its anger was so obvious that it could be clearly felt by everyone. In the void, after the Savage Lord's extreme fury, he finally did something that shocked everyone. He actually charged towards Lu Feng's body just like that. He actually charged towards Lu Feng in the craziest manner possible. Previously, when the beast's claw had reached in, it had only been moving continuously. However, this time, it had entered in an instant. The Savage Lord instantly turned into an endless amount of power and actually entered Lu Feng's body all at once. Brilliance. Endless brilliance. Destruction brilliance. At this moment, the brilliance was already extremely dazzling, causing everyone to be slightly dazed. All their words were so involuntary. They had already sunk into this destructive brilliance and found it hard to maintain their self-confidence. A moment later, the underworld race's king of massacre finally woke up. His expression was one of fright, and he was actually faintly trembling. As he looked at the endless brilliance in the distance, his expression was one of extreme fear. The legends are indeed true. According to the legends, the limit of destruction is the most beautiful moment. This moment is the eternal brilliance. Once one is immersed in this eternal brilliance, any existence will be annihilated and assimilated by this destructive force, completely turning into nothingness. As if to prove his words, the places where Lu Feng was transcending the tribulation were constantly emitting rays of brilliance. When he saw this, the underworld race's king of massacre's heart trembled even more. He knew that these were all existences that had been assimilated by the destructive force. They had really lost everything. They had turned into destructive force and were completely annihilated. His face was covered in cold sweat and filled with fear. Unfortunately, this scene didn't last long because in the next moment, he had also sunk into a state of confusion. Chapter 662. Namingshang looked at the figure in front of him that gradually faded and eventually turned into nothingness. It was hard to describe the fear in his heart. He knew that the so-called bet no longer mattered, because no matter who won or lost, this nether race genius was dead. In the end, he was assimilated into the endless destruction and turned into ashes. He was completely annihilated. Namingshang turned around. Although he was still terrified, he still looked at the center of the infinite brilliance with difficulty. It was the center of all the beauty and destruction. He knew that the reason he could survive was not because his will was strong enough, nor because he was heaven-defying. After all, he was just a genius. He could not even be considered a monstrous genius. However, a genius of the underworld race who was at the same level as him was annihilated. In the end, he turned into light and was assimilated into the destruction. The reason for all of this was because of the figure in the endless destruction in front of him, the figure that carried the hopes of billions of people. If he didn't have a connection with Lu Feng, if he didn't attach all of his will to Lu Feng, if he didn't go to the battlefield in the cosmic void to pray for him, this time, he definitely would not have received the feedback of Lu Feng's will. he definitely would not have woken up in this eternal brilliance and avoided the fate of being assimilated. Emperor, this is an emperor. Not only him, but all the human race geniuses and monstrous geniuses who were watching here did not perish. They had all witnessed Lu Feng's Saint Remains battle, and were part of the younger generation who viewed Lu Feng as their faith. Therefore, they finally received the feedback of Lu Feng and received the protection of Lu Feng's will. In the end, they escaped the fate of being annihilated. What they experienced just now was not the danger this time, but the most profound feeling they had for those who had narrowly escaped death was not the danger this time. It was because Lu Feng's existence was really too difficult to measure. Is that the will of an emperor? Is it the existence of an emperor? No wonder he could create such a shocking Saint Remains. No wonder he could become the endless number one. Is such a will that a mere peak perfect stage expert can possess. Countless people saw it at the very last moment. They saw the center of their beliefs, the pinnacle of their beliefs, the supreme posture that transcended all the greatness of the past and the present. In front of Lu Feng's will, they felt that their own wills were like ants. That kind of unparalleled will terrified them, and they found it hard to believe. It was also because of this that they finally understood why Lu Feng was able to maintain his nature under such a terrifying karmic fire calamity. He was still able to forcefully overcome the calamity without severing any connections. When they looked at the endless brilliance again, many of the human beings no longer had the same doubtful expression as before. They were filled with endless hope and had regained their endless perseverance. They believe, they firmly believe, they understand, they affirm. Lu Feng, the emperor, will succeed. He would definitely create another miracle, be reborn from the ashes once more, and create eternal glory. Pain. This was an indescribable and extreme pain. However, Lu Feng was still the same as before. He was still persevering. His face was distorted, and his pupils were infinitely enlarged. Endless brilliance appeared from every part of his body, filling every tiny unit in his body. At this moment, even Lu Feng's pupils were shrouded in endless brilliance. Originally, this was already certain death. After all, wherever the brilliance existed, everything would be decomposed into nothingness. However, the reality was the same. Although Lu Feng was still Lu Feng and seemed to be a whole, his entire body was so hazy. At this moment, he had been decomposed into countless tiny units. At this moment, even his soul was the same. If it were any other existence, any existence below the gods, they would have already died. This was because even their souls had been decomposed into countless tiny existences by the calamity. However, Lu Feng was still not dead. This was because his will was still there. Back in the core area of a massacre abyss, he had faced countless life and death situations, but Lu Feng had never faded. He had always persisted in his own heart, truly wandering between life and death, struggling in the midst of oblivion. In the end, he had returned, even carrying the mark of life and death. In the end, he had comprehended the power of life and death, becoming an invincible existence who had comprehended 6 supreme powers. So now, this calamity that seemed certain to others was nothing in front of Lu Feng, who had comprehended life and death. Of course, this was nothing, and there was a limit. If Lu Feng's will could not persist, if he fainted like he had in the massacre abyss, then the power that controlled the smallest particles of his body and soul would disappear. At that moment, Lu Feng would truly become nothingness, becoming the same as those existences that had been assimilated into destruction and ultimately being annihilated. Therefore, he could only persevere. He could only persevere in this endless calamity. Many existences of the human race quietly looked at the sky, at the figure within the endless brilliance. They should not have been able to see anything through the endless destruction. However, for some reason, when they were awakened by Lu Feng's will, when they relied on Lu Feng's help to walk out of death again, they seemed to have become one with Lu Feng. They seemed to be able to sense Lu Feng's every move. These people were silent, their eyes trembling. They were moved, persevering, admiring, and believing. Nanming Shang was the one who had interacted with Lu Feng the most among these people. He also knew Lu Feng the best. Therefore, at this moment, his feelings were the deepest. Emperor, if you didn't want to use this calamity to temper your invincible body, then perhaps you would have already overcome this endless calamity and reached a new peak. But your ambition is too great. You chose an extreme that no one has ever chosen before. You chose a path that should not have existed in the first place. Therefore, you endured pain that has never been experienced before. However, Emperor, we believe in you. We believe that since you have made your choice, then you will definitely reach the end. Because you are our belief. You are Emperor Lu Feng. It seemed to confirm Nanming Shang's words, as if to prove that Lu Feng was the greatest existence in this era. The next moment, turbulence appeared. After endless trials and tribulations, the most brilliant moment had actually appeared. The particles, which were already the tiniest of particles, were broken down and destroyed once again. It seemed that this time, it would not be satisfied until Lu Feng was completely destroyed. This scene caused the hearts of countless people to twist once again. They knew that this was the final moment. Even the power of annihilation knew that this was the final moment. If he could overcome it, then Lu Feng would become invincible. Then Lu Feng would really condense the most terrifying body in history. Everything was at the final moment. Lu Feng could no longer feel anything in his body. Even his soul had been completely broken down. Lu Feng had lost all feeling. However, in the deepest part of his body that was not broken down by the power of annihilation, in the center of his will, Lu Feng was still calm. Eternity as one, true self as one. This was Lu Feng's persistence. His persistence. Finally, he erupted. Lu Feng was no longer calm. Lu Feng's calmness had disappeared. Lu Feng finally erupted. In an instant, the tiniest particles began to disappear. They began to slowly condense and form a substance. They began to gather. Countless soul particles gathered and formed a complete soul body. That was Lu Feng, the true independent Lu Feng. In the next moment, countless wandering, illusory eyes began to flicker and real substance began to appear. The terrifying calmness in those eyes had disappeared. This was the final moment. If he succeeded, Lu Feng would enter a whole new realm. He would be able to crush any existence just by relying on his physical strength. It would be enough to bear his invincible power. Therefore, he was no longer calm. He wanted to go crazy. He wanted to use his craziness to erupt with his greatest power. Behind him, the illusory figure of the great emperor appeared again. Unlike before, the illusory figure of the great emperor seemed to be more substantial this time. However, it clearly carried an ethereal feeling, as if this real and illusory figure could disappear in the next moment. The face of the illusory figure of the great emperor, which had always been hazy, finally became clear. At this moment, countless humans could vaguely see a little bit more clearly. For many humans, the face was very blurry and they could not see anything at all. However, for Nanming Shang, who had witnessed all of Lu Feng's miraculous feats with his own eyes, he could see through the haze. An emperor. So, this is an emperor. You want to surpass the human monarch. You really want to surpass the human monarch. From a moment you condensed this illusory figure of the great emperor, you wanted to surpass the human monarch. Nanming Shang could vaguely sense that the existence of the illusory figure was actually Lu Feng. He had actually used himself as the prototype to condense the first great emperor avatar in history. Back then, after the human monarch became a deity, he relied on his amazing talent to condense the illusory figure of a human monarch using himself as the prototype. However, you did it when you were only a demigod. Surpass, this is surpassing again. This was a complete surpassing. It was a surpassing that could not be described in words. Lu Feng had completed the world-shaking miracle that only a human monarch could do at the deity level. This kind of surpassing left everyone speechless. Nanming Shang knew that Lu Feng had used himself as the prototype to condense this invincible incarnation in order to surpass the human monarch. Since ancient times, there have been many people who had used themselves as the prototype to condense an illusory figure. However, almost all of them had failed. This was because an incarnation using oneself as the prototype required an invincible willpower. This willpower could not be lacking in any way. It had to firmly believe that one was invincible. If one failed, the illusory figure would collapse, and one would lose the right to condense an illusory figure. In previous eras, there might have been people who succeeded. However, in this era, only one person had truly succeeded. That person was the human monarch. Apart from the human monarch, no one would dare to condense an incarnation like this because they did not believe that they could remain invincible forever. They knew that once they failed, they would fail completely. They would never have the right to peak at the peak. However, the human monarch did it. And now, the emperor has done it too. He is already invincible. No matter who he faces, he will always be invincible. Therefore, his illusory figure is about to succeed. Once the illusory figure was successfully condensed, Lu Feng's terror would rise to another level. This time, the emperor has passed the unparalleled calamity. His physical body will reach an unimaginable level. The embryonic form of the number one combat body in history is definitely not something that can be casually said. Even a human monarch might not be able to compare. In addition to the formation of his invincible illusory figure, Nanming Shang really did not dare to imagine. The previous Lu Feng was already a kind of limit. He represented a kind of terrifying realm. No one could compare to him. In the same realm, there was no existence in the endless space-time that could compete with him. And now, after this even more extreme transformation, just how terrifying would Lu Feng become? Chapter 663. In the void, Lu Feng's head was completely formed. At the same time, the face of the great emperor's shadow behind him gradually became clearer. At this moment, everyone could see it clearly. They exclaimed, were shocked, and were seething with excitement. The great emperor's shadow had begun to condense. In the next moment, Lu Feng's mouth let out an earth-shattering sound that reverberated through the sky. As the sound reverberated, the condensing speed of Lu Feng's body continued to accelerate and continue. In the blink of an eye, the neck and body were formed. Arms appeared and legs flickered. At the last moment, the crystal-clear, jade-like arms were born, and the bare feet were complete. Lu Feng had succeeded. After experiencing hundreds of millions of life and death situations and crossing countless tribulations, my will is immortal and my soul is eternal. This was Lu Feng. Endless tribulations couldn't defeat him. The most terrifying ordeal in history couldn't crush him. Lu Feng had finally done it. The tyrannical battle constitution was enough to bear all of his combat strength. It was enough for Lu Feng to wield his most powerful fists against any opponent. It was enough for him to madly use supreme techniques, the taboo of the universe, the ultimate invincible immortal technique that could destroy the entire universe. 1 billion mortal world, 1 billion immortals. This was a kind of harvest, an achievement, and an invincibility. At this moment, he could finally use all of his strength without any scruples. At this moment, the world was clear and peaceful. It was as if the apocalypse that had happened before was just a figment of everyone's imagination. However, everyone knew that it wasn't fake. It was the most real thing. This was because the figure flickering with eternal radiance in the sky was proof of the existence of all of this. In the end, Lu Feng had succeeded. He had truly succeeded. At this moment, he was standing quietly in the sky. Beside him, many existences of the human race began to fly over. In just a few minutes, more than 50 geniuses and monsters of the human race had arrived at Lu Feng's side. When they looked at Lu Feng, their eyes were filled with a strange light of worship. They knew that the current Lu Feng was terrifying, invincible, and terrifying. His body had become a truly supreme and terrifying weapon. Perhaps it was not any weaker than those terrifying Grade 7 weapons. Looking at Lu Feng, Nanming Shang finally spoke. Congratulations, young Master Lu. You have once again created a great miracle. When you walk out of the ruins, I'm afraid a shocking phenomenon will descend. After all, this time, not only have you become your original existence, you've even transcended 4 world-ending tribulations that have never been seen since ancient times. Due to the laws of this place, perhaps nothing will be displayed. However, once you return to the universe, there will definitely be a shocking phenomenon. I really want to see you right now. I want to see the moment when you cause a world-shaking phenomenon. Upon hearing Nanming Shang's words, countless people from the human tribe thought the same way. Their faces were filled with pride at the moment. Lu Feng's strength was the strength of the human tribe. Everyone understood that the day Lu Feng achieved great success, the day he ascended to the supreme throne, would be the day when the human race once again dominated the universe, dominating space-time. Therefore, when they saw Lu Feng's progress and how terrifying Lu Feng was, they did not feel any jealousy. Instead, they felt happy and carefree. Lu Feng nodded his head gently. As he looked at Nanming Shang and the many people from the human tribe, he smiled slowly. This was a truly incomparably happy smile. After all, his gains this time were too great. Space was really terrifying. These people would never understand how terrifying Lu Feng's harvest was this time. They would never be able to comprehend it. His demigod cultivation base had directly transcended the tribulation and reached the first-level demigod realm. His body had reached the peak of the divine transformation realm. His soul was just one step away from the divine transformation realm. In addition, Lu Feng's supreme combat body was his greatest gain. He had used the calamity of the stars and the 9 heavens to forcefully temper himself. He had completely destroyed his body and rebuilt it. It could be said that he had truly reached the pinnacle of the world, just as these people had thought. Although Lu Feng's physical body was still enhanced by 8 times, this enhancement had allowed him to enter a wonderful state because of this tempering and the great demon true body. Once he used all his power, his body, which was filled with destructive and demonic power, will be almost 9 times stronger than an ordinary person's body. Furthermore, in terms of strength, it would not be any weaker than a Grade 7 weapon. It would almost be comparable to a Grade 8 divine object that had not been tempered. One had to know that this kind of physical strength was something that ordinary supreme divine bodies couldn't compare to. It was far from comparable. It could be said that Lu Feng had not found a suitable weapon in the past. However, he did not need any weapons now. His physical body and his fists were the most terrifying and unparalleled divine weapons. The shackles of his bloodline had been shattered, his realm had been improved, and his physical body had been tempered. This had allowed his strength to increase once again. His combat strength had also become more terrifying and powerful among those of the same level. Lu Feng really had the strength to not fear anything. Furthermore, Lu Feng had also gained some benefits. That was the destructive power. This destructive power, which had already surpassed the peak of the supreme power, was definitely a supreme power that was close to or even comparable to the great demon true body and the emperor power. Although he hadn't fully comprehended it, he had engraved the mark of the power of destruction into his body and soul because of this tempering. Given some time, Lu Feng would be able to comprehend the 7th supreme power. With the 7 supreme powers and the newly formed invincible battle body, Lu Feng's combat strength among those of the same level was truly peerless and shocking. It would make the entire universe look askance. However, when he thought about these improvements and the shattering of these shackles, Lu Feng's eyes became slightly hazy. Everything was perfect and unparalleled. However, there was still a slight limitation. It was this limitation that prevented him from breaking through and condensing a supreme divine body at the demigod realm. This made him dissatisfied. Nanmingshang looked at Lu Feng and hesitated for a moment before asking, "Young Master Lu, I wonder how strong your combat strength is now." In the past, he had always addressed Lu Feng as Young Master Lu. However, after seeing so much, Nanmingshang had already regarded Lu Feng as a complete believer. He could only use a devout attitude to respect his believer. He could no longer address him as Young Master Lu. Upon hearing this, Lu Feng fell silent for a moment. He was calculating his own combat strength. After a short while, he finally spoke. "I have now entered the realm of peak first-tier demigod realm. In the past, I could only suppress a beginner true god if I used all my combat strength. Now, if I use all my combat strength, I might be able to suppress a mid-level true god. If my opponent is a high-level true god, then I might be able to put up a fight." Lu Feng had always been a monster at the peak of 7th-tier demigod realm. Therefore, once he used all his strength, he could only advance by 7 tiers at most. However, due to the existence of the supreme power, he was able to increase his combat strength to a terrifying degree after advancing 7 levels. According to normal calculations, Lu Feng should have raised his realm to that of a peak true god. However, he could defeat a mid-level true god. There is even a possibility that he could fight a high-level true god if he used all his combat strength. There was no doubt that he was the first person in history to do so. No one could compare to him. When they heard Lu Feng's words, although they had already guessed it, they were still shocked. He had just stepped into the demigod realm, but he had the strength to suppress a true god. This was something that even the human king had not been able to achieve. Lu Feng was really too terrifying. All right, let's move on. This time, I must enter the altar in the ruins. His eyes were filled with absolute confidence. Lu Feng knew that he had to enter the altar. Only by entering the altar would he have the time to raise his comprehension of the martial way to the peak and continue to refine his cultivation techniques. Only then would he be able to increase his cultivation as a psyche master and comprehend the 7th power of destruction. Therefore, he had to go to the altar this time. When they heard Lu Feng's words, everyone nodded lightly. "Young Master Lu, you should go first. With the 50 of us together, we are not afraid of any underworld tribe. If you stay with us, your speed will definitely decrease, so you should leave first." This was the area of natural disasters, so they could not move too fast. If Lu Feng waited for them, it would waste a lot of time. Now, they had a team of 50 people, and there were not many underworld tribe members left. Therefore, if they encountered a small group of underworld tribe members, they could easily annihilate them. They were not afraid at all. Since there was no danger, it would be better to let Lu Feng leave directly. That way, he would not waste his time. When he heard this, Lu Feng hesitated for a moment. Finally, he nodded lightly. "In that case, I will wait for you to enter the altar." When Lu Feng left, he was going at full speed. At the same time, countless calamities appeared in the sky. This calamity was more terrifying than the previous one. However, in the face of these calamities, Lu Feng did not slow down in the slightest. At this moment, the power of the great astral demon was fully activated. In addition, Lu Feng's body, the embryonic form of the invincible battle body, was formed. He ignored all the calamities and advanced madly. At the sight of this, the 50-odd human beings sucked in a breath of cold air. Young Master Lu, how terrifying is his physical body? Chapter 664. Any calamity was completely illusory in front of Lu Feng. They couldn't stop Lu Feng's speed at all. At that moment, Lu Feng really felt how terrifying and powerful he was. Although this new terrifying battle constitution was only in its embryonic form, its power was indeed a bit outrageous. Even when compared to the true supreme divine body, it was still much, much more powerful. I'm afraid that a less talented sacred truth body might not be much stronger than my battle constitution. This was Lu Feng's confidence. He had really encountered a supreme divine body. Although Rong Yuanyu's supreme divine body was only average, it was still a genuine supreme divine body. Lu Feng felt that when he had an eightfold physical body, he had already been comparable to or even surpassed a supreme divine body. But when he had the star great demon body, it was a complete suppression. Now, after being tempered by endless destruction, his physical body had reached an indescribably terrifying level. Facing any supreme divine physique, it was a realm that could completely crush it. Therefore, Lu Feng really had the urge to fight against the sacred truth body. The existence of the sacred truth body was incomparably glorious in the entire universe. Looking at the endless time and space, almost all the people who could condense the sacred truth body were at least at the celestial god level. Condensing the sacred truth body meant that one's physical body was 9 times stronger. The sacred truth body was a terrifying existence that could pass on bloodlines and create a first-class family. Lu Feng, who had been able to collide with the sacred truth body, would definitely have been able to create a first-class family if it weren't for the existence of the universe imprint. Originally, I could have taken the opportunity to condense a supreme divine body. Unfortunately, the last shackle still exists. Who would have thought that the foundation of my glory, the power that increased my combat strength, would now become an obstacle to advancing to the supreme peak? There was a helpless bitterness at the corner of his mouth. Lu Feng had never thought that that kind of power would become the shackle for him to advance to the supreme peak. If he wanted to improve in the future and condense a supreme divine body, he would have to break that shackle. Thinking of this, Lu Feng's eyes flashed with determination. That's right. What I want is complete transcendence. Then, it can also disappear. When Lu Feng wanted to take advantage of the situation to condense a supreme divine body, he finally failed. The reason for his failure was because of the existence of the bloodline in his body, the existence with the densest bloodline in the human king realm. If he condensed a supreme divine body, then the divine body would always carry the imprint of the human king. This would also cause his supreme divine body to never surpass the limits of the human king divine body. This might not mean much to others. After all, the human king was the supreme ruler, the greatest existence in the endless space-time, the first king. Even if they did everything they could, they would not be able to surpass sovereign personages. However, this was unacceptable to Lu Fenglai. This was because what Lu Feng wanted to refine was the ultimate constitution, a supreme constitution that surpassed everything else. Sovereign personages were what he wanted to surpass, not what he wanted to pursue. Therefore, this bloodline had become the shackles that prevented him from advancing. The power of the bloodline. If I abandon the human king bloodline, then the power of the bloodline will disappear. Although I will lose a kind of supreme power, it is not much. After all, if I can comprehend the power of destruction in the altar, then I can be considered to have gained even more. The recovery ability and other things brought about by the human king bloodline are slightly inferior to my newly condensed supreme divine body. Therefore, in short, even if I abandon the human king bloodline, my strength will not decline in the slightest. There was a scorching radiance in his eyes. Lu Feng knew that he would not decline. He would only become stronger. Just you wait. One day, I will completely surpass my ancestor. I am destined to be the greatest supreme emperor in the endless space-time. When he released his speed, it almost reached a terrifying level. Lu Feng ignored any tribulations, broke through layers of obstacles, and flew straight ahead. Finally, the area that belonged to the natural disaster disappeared completely behind Lu Feng. There were 3 kinds of tribulations in the ruins. There were natural disasters, man-made disasters, and beast disasters. The natural disaster was already over. What was left was man-made disasters and beast disasters. Not long after Lu Feng flew out, he finally saw a figure. It was a terrifying figure that was brimming with a terrifying divine radiance. Lu Feng could sense that this was definitely an existence that was at least a third-level demigod. Moreover, he was a monster from the underworld race. Of course, this was not some heaven-defying monster. He was just an ordinary genius in the Emperor Path domain who could only be called a young emperor in his own race. However, Lu Feng did not treat him as an ordinary third-level demigod monster. This was because Lu Feng could sense a faint fluctuation coming from his body. This fluctuation seemed to be deliberately hidden. Although he tried his best to conceal it, he still could not completely conceal everything. Lu Feng knew that he was not the only one who had broken through during the natural disaster. Many people had also broken through and done it. Now, this monster from the underworld race had done so. If it had not been for the fact that he had just broken through, his hidden power would not have been revealed like this. The moment he saw him, Lu Feng's eyes flashed with a cold light. The human race and the underworld race were natural enemies. Although Lu Feng had always been the kind of person who wouldn't offend others unless they offended him, he did not hold back when facing the underworld race. Lu Feng knew that if these monsters and geniuses from the underworld race were allowed to grow, it would be the billions of lives of the human race that would die in the future. Lu Feng was the emperor of the human race. He had to think about the future of the human race. Therefore, in an instant, Lu Feng had already arrived in front of that figure. Emperor Lu Feng, when he saw Lu Feng, the monster from the underworld race, did not seem frightened. He just stared at Lu Feng quietly. There was even a faint glow in his eyes. This was a burning desire to fight. Although he tried his best to hide it, he still managed to show it clearly. Lu Feng nodded his head gently. His eyes were also filled with undisguised iciness. When he had arrived, he had already judged everything. He had already determined that his opponent was dead. Seeing Lu Feng admit it, the underworld race's monster smiled faintly. He was too conceited. To be honest, I have just broken through and wanted to cause trouble for the human race. I never imagined that you would actually come knocking on my door. Lu Feng did not say anything. He had already understood. It seemed like this monster from the underworld race had the same idea as him. He had also planned to kill the geniuses and monsters of the human race after breaking through. This time, Lu Feng was even more determined to kill him. When he saw that Lu Feng did not say anything, the monster from the underworld race did not think much of it. Everyone says that Lu Feng has already surpassed the human monarch realm and become the true #1 monster in the endless space and time. Then I really want to see if you could defy the heavens and challenge a monster who is a whole level higher than you. I am a monster from the Imperial Dao domain. I am at the 4th level. Although you are a taboo monarch, you are only at the 7th level. My level is now 4 levels higher than yours. What will you use to fight me? Everyone already knew that Lu Feng was a peak-perfect stage martialist. Furthermore, Lu Feng had only broken through a few months ago. The gap between the demigod stage and the perfect stage was the process of a mortal transforming into a deity. During this period, the difficulty of breaking through was much higher than usual. They did not believe that Lu Feng could become a demigod in such a short period of time. However, he had already broken through and was a whole level higher than Lu Feng. In addition, there was only a gap of 3 levels between them. At this moment, he was full of confidence. He wanted to suppress Lu Feng and seize Lu Feng's supreme fortune. In an instant, a terrifying will began to rise. An incomparably majestic power bloomed. In an instant, the entire space and time dimmed slightly. This was the power that belonged to the peak of the deities. Feeling this power, Lu Feng smiled. However, he did not make a move. Instead, he spoke. You seem to have forgotten something. The monster from the underworld race was slightly stunned. He looked at Lu Feng, puzzled. I'm the Emperor. Previously, I created the battle of the divine relic. My opponent was a true god. I suppressed a true god, but you only have the combat power of a peak deity. Is there any comparison between us? Hearing this, the monster from the underworld race was slightly stunned. A trace of gloominess appeared on his face. However, after a moment, he recovered and had a mocking look on his face. Yes, you may have defeated a true god, But who knows if the human race deliberately orchestrated this for the sake of your reputation? No one was willing to believe that Lu Feng could defeat a true god when he was at the perfect stage. Therefore, there was a rumor circulating in the universe that the previous divine relic was deliberately orchestrated by Lu Feng and the human race. All of this was to let Lu Feng complete the divine relic and become famous in space and time. Lu Feng shook his head gently and did not say anything more. He looked at the monster from the underworld race and finally raised his arm slowly. At this moment, the monster from the underworld race was also full of caution. Although he was confident that he had undergone a metamorphosis and might really have a chance to fight Lu Feng, he still needed to be cautious. A person's reputation was like the shadow of a tree. Lu Feng's reputation was too terrifying. Even though he believed that the existence of the divine relic had been orchestrated by Lu Feng and many other existences from the human race, the monster from the underworld race was still extremely nervous when he faced Lu Feng. Lu Feng looked at him and slowly raised his arm. Actually, I really disdain to make a move against a monster like you. It's just a pity that if you don't die in this era, the billions of living beings of the human race will die. I, Lu Feng, cannot allow such a situation to occur. I cannot watch the billions of living beings of the human race perish because I let them off today. Therefore, I made a move. Chapter 665. Boundless energy surged and fused with billions of profound mysteries. At this moment, Lu Feng displayed a supreme and terrifying might. He was even stronger than before. Feeling the terror lingering on Lu Feng's body, the Nether Tribe genius was truly frightened and shocked. You actually broke through. Lu Feng had also broken through and entered the demigod realm. The Nether Tribe genius dared to challenge Lu Feng. The basic condition was that Lu Feng's actual level was still at the perfect peak stage. He also firmly believed that Lu Feng could not have broken through to the demigod realm in such a short time. However, the power in Lu Feng's body was telling him that Emperor Lu Feng, had really broken through a demigod realm Lu Feng. Even if it was just a demigod realm first stage, Lu Feng was enough to frighten him. After all, if that was the case, the gap between him and Lu Feng was only 3 levels. If Lu Feng was just an ordinary monstrous genius of the epoch who had comprehended 2 types of supreme powers, he might not be so frightened by the difference of 3 levels. However, Lu Feng had once used facts to tell everyone that Lu Feng, could still suppress a monstrous genius even if he was 1 level lower. Thus, at this moment, the Nether Tribe's demonic genius was truly regretful and terrified. In front of him, Lu Feng's arm finally fell. Lu Feng did not use too much supreme power because his opponent was not qualified to do so. The moment his arm fell, the entire world felt empty. It was like a stagnation before a disaster. It was a premonition of an earth-shattering disaster. As expected, the next moment proved everything. In a trance, it seemed like the sky was about to collapse. What a terrifying supreme power. This is definitely the power of a peak god or a true god. Is it the Nether Tribe or the human tribe? Among those who entered this place, there are only a handful who can use such a powerful force. Who could it be this time? Countless existences who sensed the peerless power of annihilation were greatly shaken. They simply could not describe the horror they felt in their hearts. After a long time, the sky finally cleared up. At this moment, there was nothing in front of Lu Feng. What really existed was an empty world. Raising his hand and looking at his arm, Lu Feng was slightly dazed for a moment. After a moment, he smiled. It was a strange smile. I didn't expect my power to be so much stronger this time. Others might think that this was the power of a peak god, but Lu Feng, as a spellcaster, he knew that the attack just now was definitely the power of a true god level. Just now, it was just an ordinary strike, but it actually directly possessed the might of a true god. Without a doubt, even Lu Feng himself was shocked by this. That attack, just now, actually carried an unparalleled destructive force. Even the enhancement of my physical body has been raised to an extreme level. Is this my strength after the new transformation? Until now, he had not improved his understanding of the martial path, nor had he raised his cultivation method to the demigod level. Even so, he still had such a strong power. At this moment, Lu Feng completely understood that if he could really raise everything to the limit, even if he lost his bloodline power, he would not be any worse than a human king of this level. The next step is to raise my cultivation as a psychic to the same level. At that time, I will truly be the limit of a first-grade demigod. Finally, Lu Feng began to advance rapidly again. This time, Lu Feng did not stop at all. As long as he saw an obstacle along the way, he killed it. In just half a day, the number of demons and geniuses of the Netherworld tribe that died at his hands had reached 20. There were not many demons and geniuses of the Netherworld tribe that had entered this place. There were only 200 of them. After the heavy losses that he had suffered when he was going through the calamity, in addition to the conflict between the two races, and now Lu Feng had killed these demons and geniuses. At this moment, there were less than 100 demons and geniuses of the Netherworld tribe. There was no doubt that after so many relic openings, the Netherworld tribe this time was the saddest and most miserable. Soon, Lu Feng could vaguely sense a terrifying, ancient, and desolate aura. It was a kind of space-time mark that made him tremble indescribably. Such an existence was much stronger than any desolate aura he had ever felt before. Too much. Even the great wilderness totem could not give me such a feeling. The totem of the Great Desolation was once a 12th grade artifact. It was a terrifying existence that had almost stepped into the 13th grade. Although it had fallen because of the sacred steel, its existence was still shocking. But now, the aura emanating from the altar was even more terrifying than the Great Wilderness Totem. This caused Lu Feng to be completely shaken. This is a sacred relic that belonged to the human Tao epic. It was created by the immortal existences of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. Power is indeed shocking and terrifying. As Lu Feng grew stronger, his reverence for the universe and those existences of the past deepened. In his eyes, the Divine King was the Divine King. He represented a kind of terrifying fighting strength. But now, things were different. Lu Feng already had the fighting strength of a true god. With a wave of his hand, he could turn a huge planet into dust and nothingness. Even so, he was still just a true god. Above him, there were still celestial gods and the 10th level virtual king. The gap between them was incomparably huge. As for the god kings above them, how terrifying would they be? Ooh, no matter what, my future is destined to surpass everything. I want to become a supreme ruler. I want to become the pinnacle ruler of all supreme rulers. This is where my true goal lies. In the past, becoming a martialist had already been his dream. Now, after completing countless shocking transformations, becoming a martialist had become a thing of the past. Being a god had already become a thing of the past. What he wanted now was to break through to the ultimate realm that all living beings of billions of epochs looked up to. Lu Feng felt the desolate aura and moved again. His speed was incomparably shocking. However, this speed didn't last long. Because of the things that appeared before him, Lu Feng slowed down slightly. Lu Feng smiled helplessly as he looked at the black mass in front of him. Looks like I'm destined to be the unluckiest person on this trip to the ruins. The black mass in front of him, which seemed to cover the entire sky, was a demonic beast. This was the final obstacle to entering the altar. It was also considered the greatest obstacle by many existences of the Lu family, the beast disaster. Dark Knight Spirit, I didn't expect that I would encounter such a thing. This demonic beast should be one of the most terrifying types of demonic beasts in the beast disaster. Looks like my luck is really heaven-defying. When he had walked the path back then, Lu Feng had forever lost the blessing of the universe's providence. Because of his choice, he had become a person that even the heavens were jealous of. It could be said that he was already lucky that endless calamities didn't appear every day to kill him. Therefore, encountering the most dangerous thing wasn't a big deal. The strength of a Dark Knight spirit should be around the second or third level of the demigod realm. If it was a single entity, it would be considered a terrifying existence among the demonic beasts in the ruins. However, the Dark Knight spirit is a demonic beast that lives in groups. Every time they appear, there will be around 100 of them. However, this time I encountered the Dark Knight spirit in front of him covered the entire sky. There were probably tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of them, let alone 100 of them. When hundreds of Dark Knight spirits worked together, even a god would be frightened. Now that the sky was filled with them, even a true god would have to retreat. After all, these demonic beasts weren't afraid of death. If their companions died, they would only become crazier. Looking at the countless Dark Knight spirits in front of him, Lu Feng even suspected that all the Dark Knight spirits in the ruins had come here. He took a deep breath. At this moment, Lu Feng's power started to slowly increase. When other people faced such a group of demonic beasts, they could only choose to take a detour or hide and wait for them to leave. After all, these demonic beasts didn't have any intelligence. It was very difficult for them to discover geniuses and monsters who were deliberately hiding. However, Lu Feng wasn't just any ordinary person. He was Emperor Lu Feng. If he retreated just because of this, then he wouldn't be Lu Feng. Therefore, in the next moment, Lu Feng moved. He directly charged towards the night spirits that filled the sky. Chaos, endless chaos. At this moment, the Dark Knight spirits also discovered Lu Feng's existence. To them, anything that had life aura, unless it was an existence of their own race, was an enemy that needed to be eliminated. Therefore, countless Dark Knight spirits were in chaos. They didn't have any order at all. They didn't stop at all and went completely crazy. At this moment, it was as if the sky was covered in darkness. It was filled with a terrifying, overbearing aura that made people tremble in fear. It was indescribable. At this moment, even if it were a true god facing this, he would most likely turn pale and give up on any thoughts of killing. However, although Lu Feng wasn't a true god, his strength was far from what a true god could compare to. At the next moment, with an inexplicable smile, Lu Feng slowly raised his arm. Behind him, the entire sky turned dark. This was a shocking phenomenon. It was as if an era was being destroyed and a space-time was being suppressed. Sky Destroyer. This was a brand new immortal technique that Lu Feng had created after fusing the greater heaven-level Qing Ming Tian and two other supreme immortal techniques. The power of power was many times more terrifying than the greater heaven-level Qing Ming Tian. Finally, the Sky Destroyer was completely formed. Although the cultivation of a Psyche Master was still at the peak of the King's Psyche Master level, the power of the main body had already entered the peak of Demigod First Stage. Therefore, the power of the Sky Destroyer this time was actually unleashed by Lu Feng, who was close to the peak of Demigod First Stage. Previously, the Sky Destroyer unleashed by the peak of the King's Psyche Master level was enough to suppress Rong Yuanyu, who had condensed a supreme divine body. Now that he was facing these ordinary demigod beasts, it was naturally easy for him to kill them. Of course, only Lu Feng had such an ability. After all, there was no special case like him. In the next moment, the Sky Destroyer was completely formed. Just as the Dark Knight spirits were about to arrive, the Sky Destroyer suddenly disappeared. A strange look appeared in Lu Feng's eyes. However, the army of Dark Knight spirits had already arrived. Lu Feng did not have time to think about anything else. Without the existence of the Sky Destroyer, the pressure he had to face at the moment was too much. A bloodthirsty look appeared in his eyes. It boiled and filled his entire pupils in an instant. Lu Feng already knew that this massacre was unavoidable. What he had to face was a real bloody battle. Therefore, he did not hold back anymore. A punch that shook the starry sky contained a huge amount of power. Just the moment of the collision set off a berserk wave. Lu Feng's attack cleared a small area in an instant. Among them, there were at least 300 Dark Knight spirits that were turned into ashes. It was indeed terrifying to kill 300 demigods with one punch. However, Sensing such an outcome, Lu Feng did not feel happy at all. Instead, a slightly dignified look appeared in his eyes. Looking at the dark night spirits in the distance who had already surrounded him and were becoming crazier, Lu Feng let out a sigh of relief. He could feel that these dark night spirits were different from those demigods. They were different from those giant beasts with spiritual intelligence that he had encountered before. They were really terrifying. Although they had lost their spiritual intelligence and did not have that strange change, they did not fear fear. However, because of this, they never knew fear. Instead, they became even more terrifying, causing others to fear them. Moreover, Lu Feng could clearly feel that in this place, the laws in the space were filled with a mysterious blessing. This had no effect on outsiders like them. However, to these demigods, it seemed to have a huge blessing. They were all beings that were born here. They were born to be compatible with all the laws and powers here. They were blessed by a great power. Lu Feng's attack, just now, in the outside world, not to mention some demigods in the second or third stage of the demigod realm, even if they were real deities, Lu Feng would be able to kill them. However, in this place, he could only kill about 50 demigods. This was really hard to accept. Chapter 666. Lu Feng took a deep breath, and this time, the night spirits that filled the sky once again rushed towards him. The powerful power of power seemed to be tearing space and time apart. This was definitely a shocking scene, a scene that made people's hearts stop beating in fear. However, in the face of this, Lu Feng remained calm and silent. His eyes overflowed with bloodlust, but his body did not change in the slightest. Very well. Since there are no consequences for killing you, I will stay here and take a look at the power of my invincible combat body. In an instant, all traces of the existence of the supreme power disappeared. Lu Feng had given up on any enhancement of his combat strength. His realm started to decline in an instant. In an instant, he actually fell out of the deity realm and became a first-tier demigod. Such a scene was undoubtedly extremely shocking. It should be known that under the circumstances that the heavenly destruction could not be used, it would be extremely difficult for even a true God-level existence to face the endless dark night spirits. It might even be impossible. However, Lu Feng had actually chosen to disperse all his power and rely only on the strength of his physical body to forcibly resist. This was enough to be called an incomparably terrifying and indescribably crazy action. In the sky, a first-tier demigod power was really nothing. However, when he gave up everything and focused on killing with his physical body, Lu Feng's terror was completely reflected on another level. That is, that figure, that's the Emperor. What's going on? How can the Emperor be so weak? Although these dark night spirits are terrifying and their numbers are unprecedented, given the Emperor's power, it should be very easy for him to create a gap for himself. But why is his power so weak at this moment? Many of the human race geniuses and geniuses who had previously met Lu Feng in the Calamity Zone had gradually caught up. However, when they saw what was before them, they were filled with disbelief. The number of dark night spirits was indeed terrifying. There were hundreds and thousands of times more than what was recorded. However, dark night spirits were dark night spirits. They might be able to pose a threat to them, but they shouldn't be able to do any harm to the Emperor. After all, the Emperor was a level 1 demigod. His power could definitely suppress any beginner-level true god. With such combat power, it wouldn't be difficult for him to break through the blockade of the demigod-level Dark Knight spirit. But now Lu Feng was in the middle of a battle, a crazy and hot-blooded battle. Under normal circumstances, other than when they were clashing with those world-shaking enemies, they would never appear. Moreover, these people also felt that Lu Feng's power seemed to have decreased a lot. His current combat strength was only equivalent to that of a peak demigod. This was a far cry from his peak. After hesitating for a moment, a monstrous genius of the human clan spoke up. "Should we go and help the Emperor?" Hearing this, Everyone hesitated slightly. If it was someone else, they would definitely not help unless they were extremely close to them. After all, once they joined the battle, it meant that they would have to bear the killing of the Dark Knight's spirit. Many of them were only comparable to a Dark Knight's spirit. Once they joined the battle, they would definitely be annihilated. Naturally, they didn't want to get involved in such a dangerous situation. However, someone had already spoken up. Moreover, the person they wanted to help was the hope of the human clan. Just as everyone was hesitating, a voice suddenly rang in their ears. "You're right. You're right. You're right. There's no need for that. Let's just wait here peacefully." Hearing this voice, everyone focused their attention on it. However, when they saw the person who spoke, they all revealed a confused expression. The person who spoke was Beigong Tianxi. He was the young master of the Beigong family. Seeing Beigong Tianxi's appearance, Nan Mingxiang, who had just arrived, walked over. The two of them were opponents, enemies, peerless enemies. However, that was only when they were fighting. Normally, they would treat each other as confidants, friends who could read each other's minds. And now, because of Lu Feng, the relationship between the two of them had taken another step forward. Vaguely, the two major aristocratic families, Beigong and Nanming, began to interact with one another. Of course, they were only close to each other. These two great families knew about the relationship between the first-rate family, the Lu family, and the human king, the Lu family. They also knew that the young master of the first-rate family, the Lu family, was Lu Feng's follower. The two great families had never thought of challenging the Lu family's position. Seeing Beigong Tianxi's arrival and hearing his words, Nan Mingxiang was slightly taken aback. After a moment, he asked, "Why?" Compared to Beigong Tianxi, Nan Mingxiang's relationship with Lu Feng wasn't very deep. Among those who could enter this place, there were only a few who were close to Lu Feng. Beigong Tianxi was one of them. Therefore, he must have his own reasons for saying this. Hearing Nan Mingxiang's words, Beigong Tianxi smiled slightly and turned to look at Lu Feng, who was in the void. At this moment, he had an inexplicable smile and shock on his face. Didn't you guys notice? Noticed? These people were slightly taken aback. Then, they started to pay attention to Lu Fenglai. However, as time passed, more and more people finally realized the real reason. Their faces were filled with fear and trembling. This, an emperor. He is an emperor. I'm afraid only he would dare to do such a thing. They had already realized that although Lu Feng's power was only at the pinnacle of the demigod realm, his true cultivation level was at the first tier of the demigod realm. He didn't use any support at all. Furthermore, these people saw it clearly. That was Lu Feng's battle. He relied on his physical body to kill his opponents. He didn't use any occult mysteries. He didn't even use any other powers. He relied on his physical strength to kill all his opponents. An emperor? This is too shocking and crazy. It seems like he just survived an unprecedented disaster. After condensing the supreme combat body, he wants to test the limits of his combat body. Speaking of which, although it's incomparably crazy, it's enough to make people tremble. However, this is also the most suitable. Everyone was silent, not saying a word. In the sky, Lu Feng was completely covered by the endless dark night spirits. Being in the center of the endless darkness and being attacked by countless second-tier and third-tier demigods, this feeling was enough to make one feel despair. At this moment, Lu Feng threw a punch, and several dark night spirits disappeared. However, compared to the endless number of dark night spirits, this was nothing. However, Lu Feng didn't panic at all. The killing intent in his eyes was even more vigorous. His movements didn't slow down at all. The attacks of the demigods were so terrifying, but they couldn't hurt Lu Feng at all. At this moment, his physical body had inadvertently endured hundreds and thousands of attacks. However, other than his clothes being tattered, there were no traces of him. This was the terror of his supreme combat body. The punch across the sky exploded with terrifying power. At this moment, the true essence of destruction was wanton. Lu Feng's bloody eyes gradually showed an unconcealable excitement. This is the true essence of destruction. Originally, Lu Feng planned to wait until he entered the ancient altar before trying to comprehend the power of destruction, a supreme power that was comparable to the Emperor power and the Great Demon power. However, it seemed like he didn't have to wait that long, because now Lu Feng felt that his use of the power of destruction had formed an indescribable sense of harmony. He, who had comprehended 6 supreme powers, naturally knew that this was a precursor to his impending comprehension. Therefore, Lu Feng became even crazier. The power of destruction itself is born from destruction. It's impossible to comprehend it by relying on quiet comprehension. Only endless destruction can make the power of destruction truly be controlled and comprehended. Lu Feng came to a realization. Even if he entered the altar and spent all his time, he would not be able to comprehend the power of destruction if he only meditated quietly. However, now, after experiencing a series of destruction, he gradually began to understand the true essence. Looking at the endless dark night spirits in front of him, Lu Feng's bloody and excited expression became even more intense. At first, he just wanted to test the power of his physical body. Who would have thought that he would be able to obtain such amazing benefits? Normally, there wouldn't be so many demigods for him to kill wantonly. After all, numbers were a problem. Even if there were so many of them, they would still run away. Therefore, this was probably the only time that he could kill and destroy as much as he did now. How terrifying is the Emperor's physical body? He is only a demigod now, and it seems like he hasn't condensed a supreme divine body yet. But how can his physical body be so terrifying to such an extreme degree? Many human race geniuses and monsters looked grave. They could clearly see that Lu Feng wasn't injured at all. Even though he had been attacked countless times, none of these attacks had been able to break through the defense of his physical body and hurt him in the slightest. This was simply inconceivable. The Emperor's physical body is really shocking. Back then, before going through that terrifying tribulation, he should have been comparable to an ordinary supreme divine body. Previously, he seemed to have completed some shocking transformation. The increase in his power is not weaker than any supreme divine body. After going through that unprecedented tribulation, his terror is even more obvious. Although the Emperor's physical body hasn't reached the level of a supreme divine body, in terms of terror, unless it's a supreme divine body with a heaven-defying bloodline, it can't be compared to the Emperor's. This was the conclusion that many existences saw and researched. This was the conclusion that they came to. However, they couldn't help but be shocked and tremble at their own conclusion. After all, a demigod with a supreme divine body comparable to a peak bloodline was too exaggerated. Coupled with the power of the Emperor's body, it's terrifying, really terrifying. Chapter 667. Punch after punch, Lu Feng had already entered a wonderful state. His exterior seemed to have been completely occupied by destruction. Every move he made was an interpretation of destruction. However, in the depths of Lu Feng's heart, there was an unusual tranquility. It was so tranquil that there were no ripples. The bloodthirst in his eyes gradually disappeared and was replaced by calmness. The killing intent became even more terrifying, but Lu Feng's expression became even calmer and more peaceful. It was as if this peerless destruction did not come from his hands. He was just a wise man watching from the sidelines. Finally, after countless killings, Lu Feng's arm suddenly stopped. At this moment, all the power around him completely disappeared. The will of destruction actually disappeared in an instant and turned into nothingness. He stood quietly in the sky. It was so strange. What was even stranger was that the countless dark night spirits around him did not attack. They just kept hovering in the air and surrounded Lu Feng, revealing their ferocious colors. However, they did not attack Lu Feng even once. This was a very strange scene, and many human beings naturally sensed it. They looked at each other, not understanding what was going on. They waited. This was a long wait. However, this wait did not last too long. This was because a shocking phenomenon appeared beside Lu Feng. Everyone's eyes widened in shock. They could clearly see that around Lu Feng's body and behind Lu Feng, there was a faint black light spot. Although it was incomparably dangerous, this darkness was too gloomy and could not be ignored at all. From the moment this black spot appeared, it kept expanding. In just a few blinks of an eye, it had expanded to the size of Lu Feng's body. At this moment, the crowd was completely shocked. That is actually a black hole. The black spot that appeared behind Lu Feng eventually evolved into the most terrifying, calamitous, celestial body in the universe, black hole. At this moment, all the monsters and geniuses were inexplicably horrified. The existence of black holes was definitely a taboo in the universe. After all, only a king could truly come into contact with and resist a black hole. As for those ultimate black holes in the legends, only the supreme being of the universe, the peerless divine king, could contend against them and travel through them safely. It could be said that the existence of black holes was recognized as the most terrifying existence among all the disasters in the entire universe. But now Lu Feng had actually created such a thing behind him. This caused many of the monstrous geniuses and geniuses to be completely shocked and at a loss. They stood quietly in front of the endless black hole. At this moment, the black hole had already expanded to a diameter of more than 1,000 meters. Lu Feng stretched out his arm and clenched it slightly. At this moment, the black hole finally stopped its terrifying evolution. There was an incomparably strange divine light in his eyes. Lu Feng had already sensed. So, this is the true essence of destruction. It can make everything disappear completely. So, this is the power of destruction. Lu Feng had really comprehended it. He had finally completely comprehended this power that was comparable to the power of the great demon. In this universe, it had already transcended everything. It was a supreme power that was above life and death. This supreme power was not represented by any other existence. As long as it appeared, everything would be annihilated. Everything would be annihilated. Everything would be annihilated. This was the true power of destruction. Turning around and looking behind him, Lu Feng's lips curled into an inexplicable smile. The limit of the power I can control now is this black hole. If I don't control it and let it grow wantonly, I'm afraid I'll be devoured. However, this is already considered not bad. The power of this black hole can be considered very strong. Although it can't be compared to the supreme, killing power I wielded at my peak, it's still enough to suppress heaven and earth. I can feel that this black hole is not the limit of the power of destruction at all. What it will eventually evolve into is definitely not just a black hole. It has an even more terrifying scene. Lu Feng lowered his head gently and started to ponder slowly. Around him, countless dark night spirits continued to hover. They wanted to kill Lu Feng, but the existence of the black hole prevented them from approaching. These demonic beasts of the dark night spirit didn't have any intelligence. This was true. However, this did not mean that they did not have any instincts. In front of these absolutely terrifying celestial bodies, they were still filled with an instinctive fear. Just like that, an extremely strange scene appeared in the sky. Lu Feng lowered his head and pondered. Countless monsters continued to surround Lu Feng, not daring to attack. Finally, Lu Feng slowly raised his head. At this moment, there was a glimmer of light in his eyes. There was a trace of shock. Yes, I understand. The true limit of the power of destruction is actually not the existence of black holes. No matter how terrifying black holes are, they are still one of the celestial bodies in the universe. They can be considered the most terrifying disaster in the universe. However, they are still recognized and exist by the universe itself. Therefore, they are not the most frightening thing. The way I comprehended the power of destruction was through the baptism of the Great Era Calamity. Although the Great Era Calamity was a virtual projection, it really belonged to the Great Era Calamity. Therefore, The root of the power of destruction should be the Great Era Calamity. The true definition of the Great Era Calamity is actually the Great Era Calamity of a universe. Only the Great Era Calamity of the universe could be considered a Great Era Calamity. The others were nothing. Therefore, Lu Feng came to a sudden realization. He finally vaguely understood. The ultimate evolution of the power of destruction should be the Great Era Calamity of the universe. It was a Great Era Calamity that could cause an incomparably glorious era to collapse unless a supreme ruler was born. Lu Feng even broke out in a cold sweat when he thought of this. The Great Era Calamity of the universe was a terrifying existence. It was definitely a terrifying existence that could make an epic overlord turn pale and tremble in fear. As long as he comprehended the power of destruction to the extreme in the future, would he be able to evolve such a terrifying calamity? At that moment, Lu Feng's eyes glowed with a scorching light. He even thought of giving up on the other powers and focusing on studying the power of destruction. However, this thought quickly disappeared. This was because Lu Feng was not an irrational person. Just now, he had been stimulated by his own thoughts. He had been stimulated by everything that might happen. Perhaps my future can really evolve into such an extreme calamity that will make everything in the universe a thing of the past and in an epic. However, that is not the limit I am pursuing. What Lu Feng pursued had always been the true, strongest, and most supreme. Everything else was no longer in his interest. For this reason, he had even set out on the path and opened up the future when he was still weak. Therefore, the power of destruction that could make an epic go extinct was not the root of his pursuit. The Great Era Calamity of the universe is really terrifying. It can make an epic overlord fall. However, it is nothing in front of Supreme Ruler. A Supreme Ruler is an existence that can safely pass through the Great Era Calamity of the universe. Therefore, the Great Era Calamity of the universe is not the most powerful. Lu Feng already understood this point. What he pursued was the limit to surpass the human king. The Great Era Calamity of the universe was nothing in front of the human king. Therefore, giving up everything and focusing on comprehending the power of destruction was equivalent to walking into the wrong path. Lu Feng had also thought it through. If he only studied the power of destruction, then it was actually putting the cart before the horse. The power of destruction is powerful, but it is at most on par with the power of the great demon and the power of monarchs. It is not comparable to the primitive immortal power. Since it can have such power, then what about the power of the great demon and the power of monarchs? Then what about the primitive immortal power that is above these? Those are the foundation. Compared to the power of destruction, they represent the true limit. If I really focus on the power of destruction, then it will be a joke. With a faint smile, he finally dispelled all these unreliable thoughts. Lu Feng looked at the countless demon beasts that were flying around and seemed like they would kill Lu Feng in the next moment. Actually, I should thank you for your help. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have known the limits of my combat body, let alone truly comprehend the power of destruction. Unfortunately, I also understand that if I can't kill you, you won't let me pass. And I have a reason to go. So all of you disappear. He stretched out his arm, followed by the terrifying black hole with a diameter of over 1,000 meters behind him. Just like that, he sent it out gently under the gazes of the geniuses of the human race. The existence of the black hole was indeed worthy of being the universe's peak power of destruction. Although it was not as terrifying as the Great Era Calamity of the universe, it was really enough for the present world. In an instant, the black hole brushed past him. Its speed was incomparably fast. It was also at this moment that everything along the way disappeared completely. Not even the slightest trace of it could be seen. It had completely disappeared. A path suddenly appeared in the terrifying sky that was shrouded in endless darkness. Countless dark night spirits still existed around the path, but none of them dared to take a step into the path. Lu Feng walked on the path quietly at a moderate speed. Behind him, The black hole was still quietly guarding him. Countless dark night spirits seemed to have realized something. They kept crying out, but did not dare attack. They could only watch Lu Feng leave just like that. Many human race beings were silent. They could no longer say anything at the moment. After a long time, when they saw that Lu Feng's figure had completely disappeared, they finally took to the air slowly and flew in the direction of Lu Feng. These people all understood that there would be no more demon beasts along the way that Lu Feng would pass. The terrifying black hole behind Lu Feng was enough to make any demon beast retreat, not to mention the fact that he could exterminate them with a wave of his hand. The monarch is really terrifying. Now, even these fearless demon beasts don't dare to approach him. If we follow him, I reckon that we can reduce the number of deaths. The monstrous geniuses and geniuses of the human race gently nodded. However, they didn't slow down. They followed closely behind Lu Feng and flew into the distance. Chapter 668. Generally, it would take about 2 days to reach the altar after entering this place. Given Lu Feng's unbridled characteristics and speed, perhaps half a day would have been enough. Unfortunately, he had spent more than a day in the beginning, where the natural disasters were concentrated, in order to condense the strongest combat constitution and complete the breakthrough. In addition to the wasted resources, Lu Feng had already walked for nearly 2 days. Of course, this time couldn't be considered very long. However, this was still a little too long for Lu Feng. Lu Feng was able to see it from afar. He was finally able to see the altars from the ancient times. At this moment, Lu Feng stopped in his tracks. He floated quietly in the air in an endless silence. After a long time, he finally let out a long sigh. There was an indescribable expression on his face. This was the third time Lu Feng had seen the altar. Although there were slight differences, and the steps were different, the overall shape and the embodiment of the molding were exactly the same. This altar was so similar to the one Lu Feng had seen on the Gufang star. It was almost exactly the same. The first time was on the Gufang star. The second time was in the realm of time. This is the third time. What exactly is this altar? Why did it choose the same shape in 3 different eras? There must be some kind of relationship between them. Lu Feng also had a lot of doubts about this altar. Unfortunately, he really didn't have a clue. When he had been in the human monarch's Lu family and the Federal University, he had also tried to study the origin of this altar. Unfortunately, even in the 2 ancient places of the human race, he hadn't been able to find any trace of this altar's existence. This made Lu Feng feel really helpless. It doesn't matter. Anyway, when I'm strong enough one day, I will be able to trace back through time and space. Then, all the secrets will no longer be secrets. Having figured this out, Lu Feng was a little more relaxed. In the next moment, he flew directly towards the altar. The altar was simply too big. From a moment he saw the overall appearance of the altar, Lu Feng had been flying nonstop. However, after flying for more than an hour, he still hadn't reached the side of the altar. Although he wasn't flying at full speed, Lu Feng's speed was still terrifying. In just 1 hour, he had covered at least hundreds of thousands or even millions of miles. Finally, after nearly 2 hours, Lu Feng arrived at the foot of the altar. Looking at this ancient and majestic altar that seemed to be connected to the yellow springs, Lu Feng's heart was slightly shaken. Of course, the degree of shock was limited. After all, he had seen too many things. Although this altar was indeed terrifying, it was still lacking compared to many of the miracles he had seen before. Let's not talk about the distant ones. In my consciousness space, the existence of the sky-piercing Fudu is much more terrifying than this. Only 3 levels of the sky stupa had appeared, but they were already much more terrifying than these. This made Lu Feng even more puzzled. This ancient altar should belong to the 5 ancient altars condensed during the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors era of the human Tao era. Speaking of which, the first era after the immortal and devil era should be the human era. However, Even in a terrifying era like the human Tao era, the greatest miracle is this terrifying altar. Although it is shocking and terrifying, it is far from being comparable to the sky-piercing Futu. In that case, is the sky-piercing Futu a shocking miracle that appeared during the immortal demon era? Lu Feng's heart was filled with endless mysteries, which made him feel very uncomfortable. Back then, he could just laugh it off. After all, back then, he simply wasn't qualified to explore all this. Now, as his strength gradually increased, he even had the power to suppress a true god. Now, he was qualified to see some things. Of course, Lu Feng also knew that this was all just a thought. He still didn't have the ability to really explore everything. Finally, as he pondered, Lu Feng walked to the edge of the altar. At the moment, there were many existences gathered around. With a glance, Lu Feng discovered that the number of monsters and geniuses from the two peak overlords had reached nearly 200. More than 150 of those geniuses and monsters had been lost since entering this place. This also meant that the number of people from the two great races who could make it here wouldn't exceed 350 at most. At the moment, 200 was more than half of the total. The atmosphere in this place wasn't very good. The atmosphere between the two sides was also very tense. Lu Feng vaguely sensed the aura of many killings. Among them, there was even the smell of death. As someone who had comprehended the power of death, he could naturally tell that the smell of death wasn't caused by the use of the power of death. It was left behind after the death of a living being. Lu Feng understood that there had probably been countless collisions previously. Many geniuses and monsters might have even fallen. The tense atmosphere was about to materialize. This was because everyone knew that the geniuses and monsters would basically all arrive in about 2 days. Hence, it was soon time for everyone to arrive. At the moment, many monsters and geniuses from the human tribe were standing quietly behind one person. It was the same for the underworld tribe. Both of their bodies were filled with mottled scars. All of this proved that they, or both of them, had fought with others before. Moreover, it was a terrifying battle. Otherwise, with their existence, they wouldn't be in such a sorry state. After all, the two of them were the strongest fighting power of the human tribe and the underworld tribe. On the underworld tribe side, it was naturally the young underworld king. On the human tribe side, it was the Eastwater Luo Emperor or the current Luo king, Lu Luo. Lu Feng understood that no one would have thought that the human tribe had a true god fighting power other than Lu Feng. This fighting power was actually one of the 7 emperors of the younger generation, the Luo Emperor. After Lu Feng, Yu Rong, and the Desolate Emperor appeared, the 7 emperors of the younger generation of the human tribe had become a thing of the past. In the eyes of many, it was a joke. After all, among the 7 emperors of the younger generation, besides the extremely mysterious demon emperor, the other 2 were the Eastwater Luo Emperor and the West Earth Emperor Rong. The 2 of them were only at the Emperor of Massacre, which was a level 5 existence. But now, in the human race, not to mention other things, just in the Academy competition alone, 3 unexpected kings of slaughter had appeared. They were Qi Liang, Wan Yueming, and the Desolate Emperor. The brilliance of these 3 people far surpassed that of the 7 emperors of the human tribe. Therefore, in the eyes of many people, the era of the 7 emperors had passed, and the time of the human tribe's young king had truly arrived. However, who would have thought that the Eastwater Luo Emperor, who had only been an emperor of Massacre, would actually become a king? He had become the Luo king of the Eastwater Luo Emperor, and his cultivation base had reached the peak of the demigod realm. This shocking turn of events was unimaginable. However, while this was a good thing for the human tribe, it was the saddest thing for the underworld tribe. Out of the 200 people in the group, the human tribe had 150 people, while the underworld tribe only had about 50. There was no doubt that the underworld tribe was at an absolute disadvantage. The young underworld king glared at Lu Luo with a ruthless and cold expression. His voice instantly spread across the land. Lu Luo, when you became one of the 7 emperors of the younger generation, I wasn't even a mid-grade warrior. However, I never regarded you as my opponent back then. In my eyes, The 7 emperors of the younger generation of the human tribe were just a joke. No one could deny this, and no one could say anything else about it. After all, the young underworld king's existence was a peak evildoer even in the boundless space and time. He was a supreme king, an evildoer that was even more terrifying than the Sky Dao Crown Prince and the 31st Prince. He was qualified to look down on the Emperor of Massacre. However, I never expected that the person who would stop me from obliterating everything would actually be you. You would actually be someone I don't even care about. What a pity. What a pity. I also know a little about the Liu family. I understand that if it weren't for Liu Feng's existence, I'm afraid you would also be a supreme king by now. With the power of death and the bloodline power of the human monarch Liu family, these 2 peak supreme powers would definitely make you one of the few people who stood at the pinnacle of the younger generation of the universe. What a pity. What a pity. Hearing this, many existences of the underworld race revealed a strange expression. However, they didn't say anything because the current situation wasn't something they could casually say. Hearing this, Lu Luo only smiled gently and looked at the young underworld king with some ridicule. He slowly said, "Our Liu family is different from other aristocratic families. They might even fight to the death for some trivial matters. However, such a situation would never happen in our Liu family." Hearing this, the one who felt the most awkward wasn't the young underworld king or the people of the underworld race. Instead, it was Yuyo Ronghua who was standing behind Lu Luo. In the bloodline of the Yuyo Emperor, Yuyo Qingran's bloodline power was eventually concentrated on him. This made another Heaven's Pride of the Yuyo family very unhappy. He even did some impulsive things after Lu Feng arrived. Of course, the end result was that the Heaven's Pride of the Yuyo family was suppressed for 10,000 years. Although this matter had already passed, he still felt a little awkward talking about it. Of course, Yuyo Ronghua only felt a little awkward. After all, this kind of thing was very common in aristocratic families. Moreover, he also knew that Lu Luo didn't say this to target him. Hearing Lu Luo's words, the young underworld king only shrugged his shoulders slightly. "I'm just clarifying one thing. It's just a pity for you. Since you don't want to appreciate it, then it's not good for me to say anything. Although your strength is comparable to mine this time, and you've become the true #1 expert among the younger generation of the human race who entered this place, it won't last long. But I don't think this will last for long, because the moment I leave this place, I will definitely surpass you. At that time, Luo King of Dongshu, you'll definitely die." Everyone knew that the young underworld king's first appearance, his first peerless massacre, was ultimately ruined by Lu Luo, the king of massacre. As a supreme king, he was really unwilling to accept this. It was really difficult for him to accept this. If he was obstructed by Lu Feng, then he wouldn't be able to say anything. After all, Lu Feng was the taboo king. Although they were both supreme kings and monstrous geniuses of this era, strictly speaking, Lu Feng was much stronger than him. However, Lu Luo was different. Lu Luo was destined to be surpassed by him. Anyone who was going to be surpassed by him was like an ant. Now that he was being provoked by an ant, how could he remain calm? Therefore, he wanted Lu Luo to pay the price. And the price was death. Lu Luo smiled faintly. However, this smile was mixed with a kind of contempt that could be easily felt by anyone. "If you can't kill me now, then you won't have the chance to kill me in the future." Because Lu Feng said that the Nether race will definitely lose their current generation's young underworld king in this trip to the ruins. Hearing this, the young underworld king's expression was filled with endless gloominess. He looked at Lu Luo and no longer concealed his killing intent. Chapter 669. Lu Feng? Emperor Lu Feng? Indeed, he's a little terrifying. However, many things about him are exaggerated. That's all there is to his strength. The current him is only at the peak of perfect realm. I am already at the peak of second layer demigod realm. What qualifications does he have to fight with me? A monstrous genius of second layer demigod realm. Ordinary true gods were no match for him. As for Lu Feng, he had only suppressed a true god. Of course, in the eyes of many monstrous geniuses and geniuses of NetherClan, Lu Feng's so-called suppression was fake. It was just a boast from NetherClan. Although Lu Feng might be really terrifying, as he was the taboo king, there was still a gap between him and NetherClan. Therefore, NetherClan was confident that he would not fall into a disadvantageous position when facing Lu Feng. Everyone was quietly looking at Lu Luo and young Nether King. They could vaguely feel a terrifying and oppressive atmosphere. However, no one noticed his arrival. No one saw the trajectory of his movement. When everyone noticed his arrival, everything froze in an instant. A figure was sent flying backwards, breaking through the void and shaking the heaven and earth. Many monstrous geniuses of NetherClan and HumanClan were stunned when they saw the figure that was sent flying backwards. Then, they were horrified. He stood quietly in the center of everything, quietly looking at the surroundings. He looked at everything, including the figure that was sent flying backwards. No need for the future. Now, you can die. His calm and tranquil figure looked at the figure that was sent flying backwards. He said those words calmly, but they made the hearts of millions and millions of people tremble. If I want to kill you, I can do it now. And now, I have come to kill you. Emperor has broken through. Emperor has become even more terrifying. Lu Feng was even more terrifying. Everyone could easily feel the divine radiance lingering around him. They knew that Lu Feng had made a breakthrough. He had finally created a shocking miracle and completed the leap of invincibility. He had become a true demigod. When Lu Feng was at his peak, he had the strength to fight and even suppress the young Netherworld king. Now that he was even more terrifying, he naturally had the qualifications to say those words. Naturally, he had the qualifications to accomplish everything he said. Speechlessness, silence, fear. The many existences of the underworld race looked at Lu Feng. They could no longer describe their feelings at this moment. They all knew about Lu Feng and how decisive Lu Feng was in killing. These people naturally knew how shocking Lu Feng's decisiveness was. He wouldn't be afraid of your identity or background. As long as he was enraged, he would even dare to kill the young master of Dishi family. Naturally, these people all understood this. Moreover, they knew that Lu Feng's hatred towards the underworld race was even more terrifying. Therefore, once the young Netherworld king died, these people would be slaughtered by the emperor and the human race. At this moment, the feeling of fear spread. Finally, the monstrous geniuses of the underworld race focused their eyes on the young Netherworld king. They hoped that the pride of the underworld race, the future Nether King, could protect them. At the last moment, under everyone's gaze, the young Netherworld king finally stood up slowly from the cracked ground. His face was filled with incomparable humiliation. Just a moment ago, he said that he didn't care about Lu Feng at all and even wanted to kill him. However, in the next moment, he suffered such a terrifying injury. This was simply a slap to his face. Of course, the thing that he couldn't accept the most was Lu Feng's appearance. He actually couldn't grasp it. This kind of strength had already proved that Lu Feng had the strength to crush him. He slowly walked over. Although there wasn't any injury on his body, he couldn't hide the heavy injury deep in his heart. He looked at Lu Feng with a crazy look in his eyes. As for Lu Feng, he still looked indifferent and calm. Although he was filled with killing intent, he still didn't have the slightest trace of complexity. Emperor, you actually broke through. When he spoke, there was no longer that kind of resentment like before. However, there was still a dense killing intent, which made people's hearts tremble. Lu Feng chuckled and nodded slowly. At this moment, he also restrained himself, as if he was talking to a good friend, quietly telling something. I felt that the time was right, so I broke through. Lu Feng said very indifferently, but the words that came out of his mouth made people feel uncomfortable. I felt that the time was right, and it was enough, so I naturally broke through. This was a sentence that made many monstrous geniuses tremble in fear. One should know that in order to break through, many monstrous geniuses had gone crazy. They had consumed all kinds of divine items, used all kinds of methods, and thought of many methods. However, in the end, all of them failed. It was very difficult for them to break through. Monstrous geniuses represented extreme talent and cultivation speed. However, this cultivation speed was built on hundreds and thousands of times more resources and a foundation of hardship. And it was only by relying on countless people that they finally managed to break through. However, when it came to Lu Feng, an existence that was countless times more terrifying than any monstrous geniuses and monstrous geniuses, it was so easy for them to break through. How could they endure this? Hearing this, even the young underworld king's face was slightly suffocated, and a slight distortion appeared on his face. However, this distortion disappeared very quickly. Emperor, you are indeed an emperor. Breaking through is really too easy for you. Lu Feng chuckled and nodded indifferently. His current appearance made him feel even more uncomfortable. I remember when I just entered this place, I said something. That is, the new young underworld king of the underworld race is destined to die in the hands of our human race. The previous young underworld king was a monstrous genius that appeared more than 600 years ago. However, at that time, the human race also had a monstrous genius, and that was Heavenly Goddess Jialan. Heavenly Goddess Jialan's existence was even more terrifying and extreme than the current young underworld king. In the end, before the real war between the two races, the young underworld king was chased by Heavenly Goddess Jialan across hundreds of galaxies and finally killed. That was the first time the young underworld king of the underworld race had fallen in the hands of a foreign race. That was also the beginning of the real disaster between the human race and the underworld race. Now, the new young underworld king of the underworld race had also appeared. However, this time, it was even more extreme. At such a young age, he had actually comprehended 3 supreme powers. This was probably one of the few in the history of the underworld race. However, it was a pity that the glory of the underworld race could not continue. Because after the young underworld king appeared in the underworld race, an even more terrifying existence was born in the human race, Emperor Lu Feng. Where Emperor Lu Feng was, heaven and earth would submit to him. Previously, he had said that the young underworld king of the underworld race would fall in the hands of the human race again. In that case, he would have to fulfill his promise. He wanted the young underworld king of the underworld race to truly disappear into nothingness. Lu Feng's words were still so calm and indifferent. However, anyone who heard them would feel a chill from the bottom of their heart. They knew that Lu Feng was serious. Sure enough, the young underworld king's expression was very ugly at this moment. He could no longer pretend that nothing had happened and that he didn't care about anything. Looking at Lu Feng, the young underworld king took a deep breath and finally changed his expression to one of incomparable ruthlessness. Emperor, do you really think that you are the infinitely great divine king? Do you really think that you are a human monarch in the great success realm? You want to obliterate me at will? Can you? Although you have made a breakthrough, I, Galagalos, will always be the current young underworld king. I may not be a match for you, but I will definitely not be obliterated by you so easily. Young Netherworld King Galagalos was already a little crazy. With his current status and peerless aptitude, he was still in the top ranks in the endless galaxy and in the era where the taboo king did not appear. In the previous era, such aptitude was definitely the greatest possibility to compete for the Emperor's path. However, at this moment, in front of Lu Feng, who was even one level lower than him, he had become an existence that could be killed at will. How could the young underworld king be at ease? Therefore, he was enraged and he roared. Unfortunately, in the face of the young underworld king in such a state, Lu Feng just smiled indifferently. However, this smile did not last for too long, because in the next moment, Lu Feng's eyes became even colder. Gradually, a terrifying will lingered in Lu Feng's body. It was full of destruction and extreme power. The horror of the physical body actually caused the tremors that tore the void apart. Looking at this scene, the young underworld king's eyes flashed with a trace of horror. Supreme? Supreme divine body? No, this is not a supreme divine body. There is no divine body origin in it. But why does this physical body give me a more terrifying feeling than those supreme divine bodies? It seems like it has the power of an ordinary, truth divine body. How is this possible? It was undoubtedly a shocking thing to hear a supreme monarch of an epic say that this was impossible. However, at this moment, it really appeared. This was because Lu Feng's physical body was too shocking. It was extremely shocking. Lu Feng was indifferent, and he chuckled. He was still the same as before. His physical body, other than the last barrier that could not be broken due to the shackles of the bloodline, had already become the most powerful physical body. Such a powerful physical body was incomparable among the existences of the same level in the endless eras. After all, his physical body had gone through 4 apocalyptic tribulations. At the last moment, Lu Feng had even used the true essence of destruction to refine it completely. Therefore, his physical body was definitely terrifyingly powerful beyond anyone's imagination. Of course, Lu Feng could not suppress the young underworld king with just the power of his physical body. After all, the young underworld king was a supreme king who had comprehended 3 supreme powers. Therefore, Lu Feng's power had further erupted. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.